Recording in progress.
Good evening and welcome everyone to the Planning and Transportation Commission meeting. And Ms. Dow, could you call roll, please?
Chair Suma,
Present.
Vice Chair Chang,
Here.
Commissioner Aiken,
Here.
Commissioner Heckman,
Present, attending remotely with no other person in the room with me.
thank you. Commissioner Liu,
Present.
Commissioner Rectal,
Here.
Commissioner Templeton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much for that. And now is the time where we have, we go to the public to speak to items that are not on this evening's agenda. Do we have any speakers?
I have no request to speak.
Okay, we will move on then to agenda changes, additions, and deletions.
There are no changes.
Thank you very much. And moving right along to city official reports, Ms. French.
Good evening. Amy French, Chief Planning Official. We are here tonight with several items, and this is showing the next set of meetings through the end of June, as much as we can predict. We have the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, which is going to be a big item to come forward, and hoping for the Retail Strategies draft staff report as well for May 8th. So that's in a couple weeks. We have a few more items that are noted on the screen and in the packet. Wanted to also call your attention to the council is going to be going on a break in July, but leading up to their July break, we have a number of planning items, and I don't think there's any transportation items unless Castellia School is sort of a TDM document, but most of those are planning items. So let's see, who's the May representative?
I think it's me.
Was that you, Keith? Okay. So happy to send you over some links when we get closer to those dates. And then June, we'll need one more rep, and then whoever's in July doesn't need to represent because there's no council meetings. And that concludes my report. The next item is unless you want to talk about any of those dates.
Oh,
and Raphael.
Yes, Mr. Ruiz, I think, has a few announcements.
Hi, Rafael Rios, Office of Transportation Senior Engineer. Just a few updates from transportation. At the April 29th City Council meeting is going to be a transportation workshop that will focus on the bicycle pedestrian transportation plan and rail grade separation alignment alternatives. Another good news about our Palo Alto Link, the shuttle service. The current operating hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. are going to expand beginning Monday, April 29th to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Just to better serve the morning and evening peak commute hours. And then one more update about the Caltrans El Camino Real bike lane effort. I'm sorry. Just wanted to give an update that we are accepting comments and perspectives regarding the potential parking removal. Comments can be emailed to Nathan Baird. His email address is posted up there. And also there's been a series of letters from the city to Caltrans and some responses from Caltrans. There's a whole series of them. So, and they're all available on the city's website. The link there's a link shown on the board to the project's website. Those are my only updates for this meeting, unless you have any questions.
Thank you. I do have a couple of lights, so we'll go.
Sure.
Commissioner Liu and then Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you. That was a great transportation update, and it's great news about the Palo Alto Link. My questions aren't actually regarding transportation necessarily, though, and perhaps would be best addressed to Albert. So just one quick question. So on Monday, Councilmember Koo mentioned that SB 9 has actually been struck down at a state level. And I've seen some news kind of start trickling in on this point. I'm curious if our attorney, Mr. Yang, has the latest updates or comments on what the scope of that decision is and what that really means.
Yes, so we also learned on Monday evening that SB 9 had been invalidated as to charter cities by a trial court in Southern California. It was a little bit tricky to find the actual text of that decision, but our office received it this afternoon. So we are still reviewing it to sort of understand its scope, but preliminarily, it looks like the court invalidated SB 9 with respect to charter cities throughout California. So we passed an ordinance implementing SB 9 in late 2020 and early 2021. And those ordinances contain a clause saying that in the event that SB 9 is repealed or materially amended, that the ordinances would be null and void. And so we'll be taking a look at how those provisions will apply in this situation where it's been invalidated by a court. And I expect that we'll be coming back to the PTC with some sort of follow-up on next steps.
Thank you. That's a really significant and interesting legal decision for sure. I had one more question. Perhaps this is difficult to address with right now, but there was a mass eviction just a couple of weeks ago at 531 Stanford Ave as a property was seemingly just really neglected, and all tenants were evicted with, I think, a few days of notice. I was reading news reports that there were some financial penalties applied to the landlord in the range of several $1,000s per tenant. Is there any more to the story, or is the city investigating any other follow-up actions or enforcements for this landlord?
Yeah, so I can speak generally to that item. I'm not closely involved with it, but that was a situation where the city found that there was a lot of unpermitted work done on the property and determined that it was not safe for continued habitation. And so the building was red tagged and the tenants were not able to remain because it would not have been safe for them to do so. And then in those situations, the city's relocation ordinance, tenant relocation ordinance requires the payment of relocation expenses to the tenants.
Okay, thank you. And I know it's a active kind of ongoing issue, so I hope we hear more about it and can discuss more about renter protections and also penalties to ostensible slumlords at some future juncture relatively soon. Thank you.
Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Ruiz, I want to say also that I'm delighted to hear about the updating of the hours for Palo Alto Link, and appreciate your update about the Caltrans repaving. I was hoping that in the future, when you have links to documents or letters that are relevant to topics that have come before us, that you could have those emailed out to the PTC. We do have a paper copy of that URL. Perhaps we'll have maybe we'll have a electronic link as well. But in general, we like to see those sooner if we can. I don't know if Mr. Ruiz has dropped off, so if you guys can convey that to him. And then to Ms. French, I noticed that we don't have any break at all between now and Christmas Day. And I was wondering, is that something that we're planning to discuss at some point?
Well, I hadn't planned on discussing anything in the near future, but certainly anytime a member is planning some kind of, absence, that's something we can entertain and mark on our calendars. I will not be in control of the agendas after a certain point, likely August. So just
Okay,
putting
well,
that
I'm
out there.
specifically thinking between now and August. So I don't know if we want to have any time off in the summer, but, and I don't know how we have to agendize to discuss it. So I'm bringing it up right now. If we can discuss it.
I'm
great.
happy to discuss
Yeah.
it if the board so wishes. Certainly, July, the council takes a break, but the planning commission doesn't have to. August is another opportunity for a break. I don't know if one meeting suffices. We haven't taken anything but one meeting this year off, which was Valentine's
That's
Day.
true. Yeah. Well, and we've had other meetings pop on as joint meetings. So, all right. Well, that's, I guess, a question for the chair. If we want to discuss it now or then a future week.
We can probably discuss, does it need to be agendized, Ms. French, or can we discuss it in our comments at the end, comment and discussions at the end?
Yeah, it would be appropriate to discuss that at the end of the agenda.
Okay, we can do that whenever the board wants to.
Cool. Thanks.
We can do it tonight if people want to. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much for your presentations. And we're now going to move on to a study session for our retail strategies. And I think I don't think staff has a presentation, but I think the consultant does.
That's correct. The consultant will be bringing up their presentation unless they want us to bring it up. We've sent it out to the board, but let us know. Dan, I see Dan's appearing on screen. And we had this concept whereby the ad hoc committee members would be taking turns with the presentation. So let's get that uploaded and then we can talk further. Dan, do you need us to upload that? Or do you upload it on your end?
Should be sharing it now, hopefully. Tell me if you see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Yeah, good evening, PTC members and chair. Thanks, Amy. I'm Dan Wary from Michael Baker International. And this slideshow, unlike our others, we used our prior PowerPoint slides, but we really incorporated the draft recommendations and questions from the last couple of ad hoc, PTC ad hoc working group meetings. So you'll see this information shortly. Let me get on the right page here. There we go. So this is just what our overall goal was. This hasn't changed, but there were 3 sets of recommendations from the PTC ad hoc committee, and so I've got slides for each one here. And I don't know if Alan or Keith or Brian want to go through them and present them, or if you'd like me to run through them, I can do that too.
Go ahead.
So I think we can quickly set some context for some of it in terms of how we came up for some of these things. So the context that I wanted to set is that these are draft recommendations, and I guess weren't necessarily quite meant. I don't think that they were worded in a way that's precise in terms of how Commissioner Aiken and Commissioner Reckdahl and I were thinking about these. So they require, like, written as they are, I think there needs to be a little bit more context regarding them. So I think the headline here is supposed to read simplify rules. And so with that, the context that I also want to provide, I think it's in a later slide of yours showing sort of the timeline. What we're trying to get to the city council by June 10th, and which will come to us on our May 8th meeting, is the consultant's final report. And that is going to include recommendations that are not as specific as down to the level of the actual code changes, ordinance changes. It's sort of meant to be some principles to explore. So as we came up with these draft recommendations, we didn't, like, there's not been an investigation that explores what the full implication is of making some of these recommendations. So the idea, though, is that the recommendations would go before City Council. Once City Council says, yes, we like this, we like the idea of exploring this recommendation, then it would go back to staff, who would then look at the actual ordinance changes that would happen, and then it would come again to the PTC. So to get to the specifics that would actually enact the change. So that's the context of this. And then I think Commissioner Aiken has a few more words to add.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, you've covered a lot of what I wanted to say. The ad hoc met on April 12th to work out a list of proposals and questions because we had a meeting with Michael Baker on the 16th. We spent a few hours discussing what we'd heard from Surabhi and Dan and some business owners, as well as the previous PTC meetings. Thank you particularly to Ms. French for fast tracking the minutes from the meeting of the 27th, because a lot of the context you need to look at is in those minutes, the motivations for these discussions. At the ad hoc on the 12th, Vice Chair Chang and Commissioner Reckdahl took notes, and I boiled them down to eliminate the redundancies and then arrange them into themes that you see here to help manage the complexity. And that's the summary you see in today's packet. So this is just an outline that was intended for discussion on the 16th with Michael Baker and the ad hoc. It assumes an awful lot of context, which Vice Chair Chang has discussed, and it's not a formal proposal on its own. So I am sure things will have to be explained, and some are going to be added and some are going to be dropped even before it goes on to the next step. There's a big issue that's not discussed at all, which is parking, which will come up in subsequent meetings. And so we should not spend time on those issues tonight. But perhaps we can go through one theme at a time and give everyone, all the commissioners, a chance to ask questions or suggest changes.
So this is supposed to be a study session. Usually we have like a presentation followed by public comment. And so I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this, given that each of these recommendations has some context around them. So I don't know if staff, like, beyond these three buckets and then the subsequent questions, was there more to the presentation that maybe Michael Baker wants to talk about first, and then we can loop back and kind of more slowly go through just the rationale behind some of these ideas?
Sure. I think to provide a little context, again, the last time we met as the full PTC was on March 27th. And that meeting, we had a good, healthy discussion. I actually go back 2 meetings. The March 14th was, if you recall, kind of a late night meeting, and we really went through a lot of the recommendations and observations that we had as consultants for the city. That led to a healthy discussion on March 27th. And I think that led to trying to distill and collect all those ideas from the minutes. That's what Alan had just mentioned, trying to distill those down. And so I think from our recommendations, and I can pull up that other slide presentation from the 14th and the 27th, we had groups of recommendations, different approaches. When Alan kind of consolidated the PTC's comments from the 27th and then rolled that in through discussion and the ad hoc committee meetings. It came into 3 different groups, so slightly different organization, but I'll hit these 3 slides maybe for a broader context, and then we can come back. Maybe that'll help kind of understand the whole presentation. So this slide was the first set of recommendations, and that was all geared around simplifying the rules. The second set was with the objective of reducing uncertainty, and you see a whole series of recommendations there. And the third major group was to relax certain restrictions, and we'll get into those. We were really pretty excited, I think staff was as well, that the level of discussion that you had back on the 27th as the full PTC, and then the subsequent ad hoc meetings, because we felt that you really had a lot of guidance and recommendations to share with City Council. So we think that's really, this is the heart of it. And I'll just say that we talked about the next steps. We kind of showed this a little bit. So the idea is to try to get through the zoning recommendations tonight. We are working on a full report right now. We've been working on it since, well, long time, but all week long since the last ad hoc meeting. Plan is to get that to staff and then out to the full PTC in time for consideration for the ad hoc on April 30th. And then that would go out in your packets for the PTC before May 8th. So you have a chance to look at the full report. And the idea of that report is to kind of wrap this up, all the things that we've talked about throughout the process, put it all in one place. And then ideally have a recommendation from May 8th from PTC to hand off to City Council for their June 10th hearing. In addition to these 3 sets of recommendations, there were some additional recommendations that are kind of beyond the zoning, which is beyond the scope of what Serby and I are here for. But they were still good ideas. So it was important to record those and collect those and make sure that they're part of the ongoing strategy and implementation. There was also a series of 10 or 11 questions. So we provided, and I think these were intended to provide a little more context and background to some of the recommendations. There were certain things that ad hoc members maybe weren't confident of or sure of or wanted additional information to make sure that the recommendations had the proper understanding and context. So we can go through those as well. Those, I believe, were in your packet. We've cleaned them up a little bit here for these slides. But again, questions about what's allowed in, for what qualifies as retail or retail-like. So we provided that information, some details there. What's included in offices? There are different definitions of offices. Are they all the same? Are they managed the same? Their answer is no. There are certain different types of offices that are called out separately for a variety of reasons, and they are regulated separately throughout the code. I'll just kind of go through these and then we can go back to the beginning. There was some questions about takeout and maybe some opportunities to be more flexible with takeout uses. Currently, takeout uses require a conditional use permit in the retail zones. So we included the definition here and just clarify that they do require a CUP. And I think the idea there at the ad hoc level was maybe we don't need a CUP. So we can come back to that. And then some general, some are more general questions. What types of businesses are dependent on foot traffic? And should we attempt to try to co-locate these together for synergy and vitality? And then another question was, does the municipal code currently constrain any hours of operation? There are some restrictions for certain uses that, again, trigger a CUP for uses that operate between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. There was a question about the history of the nail salon. Serby and I weren't able to address that. Just a few more questions here. And then there's wanted to understand kind of the history and background to a fairly recent proposal for medical retail in the town and country area that was rejected. And I think Amy might have a little more background on that. Some other questions about whether there's any other constraints on co-location of uses. Some, multiple uses within a site, or sometimes use within a use. And so that's really these questions 7 and 8. Last couple slides. There was a question about something that I had referred to as maybe an option in a recommendation, which was to focus on outcomes instead of listing each and every type of use in the definitions. And that was an approach that the city of San Diego took with respect to encouraging active uses. And so we included that definition in here, and we had discussed that as well at the ad hoc meetings. And that was one of our recommendations previously, is to include a kind of performance-based use that would be open to uses that we might not think of today. Things that might come up, they might be new and innovative uses, for example. This would give you the opportunity to allow those without having to amend the code or go through a variance or a deviation. And the last two questions that PTC had were, what about sales tax relief? And I think this is outside of the zoning. This may be one of those other economic development pursuits and programs that might want to be considered. But the idea was, it was an idea that I think wanted to be explored a little bit. And then the last one was a question about, again, kind of getting back to what qualifies as a retail use or a restaurant. And so Amy had provided some more information on those. So hopefully that provides a little bit of context of kind of where we were since the last full PTC meeting. Again, on the 27th, we had presented a whole series of recommendations, and there was a good, healthy discussion. And again, that led to the ad hoc committee recommendations. And I'll go back to the top. And again, they're kind of grouped in these clusters. I'll stop there if anybody has any questions, and then maybe we can start to look at the specific recommendations, and we can provide some more context for each of those.
Okay, thank you for that.
If I may, just on the question of nail salons, you can think of me as the resource on nails because I have information. So if it comes up.
Thank you for that offer. If anybody has a real quick question, a clarifying question, otherwise I think we should go to the public and then bring it back for discussion. We'll just simply, the idea was kind of turn it over to the ad hoc and kind of go through their recommendations and get feedback on them. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak?
Yes, one raised hand on Zoom.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any lights up here, so why don't we open the public hearing, please?
Sure. Let me get the clock. So we have one on Zoom from John Schenk.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Schenk.
Am I up? Here we go.
Yep.
Hey, thank you all. John Schenk with Thwaites Brothers. Thwaites Brothers has been a member of the University Avenue community for, wow, probably 140 years. And we also own property in the Cal Ave neighborhood. And I want to thank you all for your robust dive into the critical issues of retail and economic vibrancy and helping support the neighborhoods we all hope would exist in our downtowns, if you will. I want to remind you of an important factor that came to light when the city did a survey, at least of the University Avenue retailers a few years ago, right in the early phase of the COVID impacts. And the conclusion was that 70 to 80% of the retailers' sales were from the daytime population. Those were the office workers. They were the ones who were filling the hotels during the week. They had the breakfasts, the lunches, the dinners, the bar tabs, etc. and the other miscellaneous pharmacy purchases, et cetera. It was a massive percentage. And obviously during especially the early days of the impacts of COVID, we didn't have any office workers. And that drove big shifts to what people perceived as viable retail. We were all shopping from home, food was being delivered home, et cetera. And I want you to remember that we ought to also be thinking about, when it comes to our codes and zonings, et cetera, is what is the city doing to, I don't know, roll out the red carpet for office employees to come back, to repopulate. We have a lot of restrictions on office, and we ought to be cognizant of those when we're trying to support our retailers. We also need to think about, well, you guys you're looking at the RPO, and look at the boundaries, especially in University Avenue. And I know you are, but I strongly encourage you to stay focused on that. There's parts of our area that, north of Cowper, it's really a terrible area for retail per se. And we used to have a part of the zoning ordinance was, we thought of it as a relief valve. When retail vacancies reached a percentage, those spaces were allowed to be filled by non-retail or office uses if there was a demand for that, to just keep the overall feeling and vibrancy alive. We need to also really be careful about the uses that require CUPs, and thank you for looking at that. And my last one is that the parklets, and I know a lot of work's gone into parklets, but parklets and closed streets are not friends of retail vibrancy. And I know that's well down the path, but we've got to be very careful about that, and aware of how it continues to evolve so we can support our overall retail vibrancy. And I thank you all. I've been reading all your minutes and watching things, and really appreciate how thoughtfully you're approaching all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. And I guess we have no other public speakers, so we'll bring it back to the commission.
Okay, great. So I think if we can pull back up the first slide of draft recommendations, which is simplify the rules. The process that we were thinking about for going through all of these would be for us to quickly go through, us meaning Commissioners Aiken, Rectal, myself, to quickly go through these to sort of explain the context for what these actually mean, and then to get feedback from the PTC as a whole. And then to do that for each of these three buckets of draft recommendations, and then find out if there's additional things that maybe don't fit into one of these buckets that would be that we should also discuss ideas from the rest of the commission, because we're sure that the rest of the commission will provide more ideas than our three heads could. Okay, so to start with this.
One more comment.
Yeah.
Some of these are really long-term and some of them are short-term.
That's right.
We want to hear feedback. We're listening, and so tell us what you think. Even if they're long-term, we want to know what we should be working towards and what we shouldn't be.
Okay. So one of Michael Baker International, for number one of Michael Baker International's ideas was to have a table that explains our zoning rules. We already have a table, actually. It's just a bit out of date. So we should definitely improve that. So that's the first recommendation. The second one was around relaxing the definitions in the code. So many of them, they'll say like retail uses such as blank, 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 and it's a long laundry list. And it says that it's including these and not excluding other things, but some of them are pretty outdated. So like there's a mention about film developing businesses. There's actually other categories that we should look at, because there's also retail as well as intensive retail, and I can't remember, extensive retail. And it may be that the code is built over time, and it just takes a long time to read through those definitions and understand exactly where one fits. So it's kind of, we're suggesting that we not necessarily relax, but clean up the definitions, perhaps partially, so clean up the definitions and perhaps move in a little bit more of a direction as Mr. Wary was suggesting, where we're aiming for the results rather than trying to define every single possible retail or retail-like use that there could be. The third one, it turns out it's not an issue, that there are no restrictions that are greater for retail than there are for restaurants. So that's kind of irrelevant now. The fourth one, Mr. Wary already mentioned, it's kind of related to definitions also. There's this takeout definition, and especially during COVID, but even prior to COVID, every restaurant has takeout. So it may not be a relevant definition, but I think we would need staff to explain to us what the implications would be, like where that definition is referred to, and what we were, what we as a city were initially trying to do when we were defining takeout. And then the fifth one is we have a lot of districts and overlays. So we have a ground floor area, a pedestrian area, a retail area. They all will overlap. And so it's very confusing. And so I think we would need, like, if it was difficult for the three of us as we were reading the code to understand where is what and what is allowed where. And it's confusing for staff as well. And again, Michael Baker International had referred to this as kind of being a bit of a mess. It is difficult to understand, but this is this is one of those long-term projects because it has a lot of implications that are not just for retail. There's building code and there's all sorts of things that also refer to these districts. And so our hope would be that we could collapse some of these overlays and districts to simplify things, or maybe make them their own like zones if we need to preserve them. But that is a much longer term effort that's not going to be immediately solved, because I think it would be a lot of work for staff. So that's this bucket. Do either Commissioners Rectal or Aiken have anything to add? And then we can ask the rest of the commission what feedback they have.
I don't think so. I'm looking just to make sure. Originally, when I wrote these lists, I had in mind ordering them from specific short-term to general long-term. And in this case, that idea is followed reasonably well. Some of the others, not so much. But yeah, the expectation is that number 5 and number 6 here are multi-year projects. So they're not things that we would expect to have impact quickly.
Okay, so then with that, I want to ask the rest of the commission, like, if you have thoughts, ideas, reactions to any of these, then now's the time to, if there's a little bit of wordsmithing or a principle that you want to capture in this that wasn't captured in my verbal description, because we know that some of it wasn't captured on the slide, to please give that feedback now, because MBI is working on their report.
So I see a light. Go ahead, Commissioner Liu.
Just extremely brief comment. I think this list looks great. I was also reading through the code, and the rules around takeout seem especially nonsensical and also especially constraining to a lot of different pop-ups and uses that I've enjoyed and are great in other cities, like little ice cream windows next to parks, or other kind of pop-ups that just kind of sell out of the window of some other business, and would full-heartedly not just consider removing restrictions, but I think the takeout restrictions could be generally removed. So yeah, I'll save other comments for the other sections.
Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you, Chair. this is a study session, so it wasn't necessary for me to reconstitute myself, but I wanted to let the commission know that I did read the minutes of the March 27th meeting and appreciated the robust explanation of the ad hoc's work and the robust discussion that followed. I also want to commend the ad hoc group for a remarkable number of hours and really a great process and product to date. I think given the complexity of what we're dealing with, this concept of 3 buckets is, I think it's a really excellent format to take to the city council and for the public to understand. So I appreciate all the work that's been done to bring us to this point. I'm supportive, excluding item number 3 here in the simplified rules. I'm supportive of all 5 of the remaining items, consistent with what Commissioner Aiken just said. I was thinking that in packaging this for the city council, in this particular list, for items 5 and 6, you might just want to put a parenthetical after each of those that says long-term or something like that. So that when the council first reads this, they know that we're thinking this is not an overnight activity. So those are my only, that's all, my only suggestions on this first bucket. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Templeton.
Thanks. Good presentation, Brianna. Thank you for Vice Chair for helping us understand what you guys are working on. This is a nit to pick, but kind of going off of what Commissioner Aiken said earlier, if this is not an ordered list for any reason, then it should be a bulleted list. Because I kind of read this in order of importance. I think Commissioner Aiken wanted to read it in order of, urgency to implement or something like that. And he's going to speak up, but that's my only comment here. It's just presentation format.
Yeah, actually, they were numbered so that during the discussion with MBI, we could identify them by number when we were talking about them. That was it.
Well, and maybe then letters. I mean, I don't know, but it does make sense. I see what you're saying. I just, it's honestly hard to compare. These each are very different, and impact is not something we really understand, right? So I don't know. I think that would be better if we could indicate that with our presentation somehow. Not that I'm going to have the solution. Just wanted to suggest that. Thanks.
I'm not seeing other lights right at the moment, but I will say that I also think, well, thanks to the ad hoc, and I also think kind of breaking it down into 3, which doesn't include beyond zoning, but that can be presented differently, I think. The only one that I'm very concerned about after eliminating 3 is the way 2 is worded: relax definitions in Pelton Municipal Code. Many seem overly complex and specific is mighty broad. So I think we would want to, I mean, I understand that this is going to go in kind of a general way to council, and they'll probably send it back to us, but I think they will need, I think we can be more specific there and agree that identifying those last 2 as really long-term municipal code fixes that are out of the scope kind of the council's goals for immediately helping retail. So identifying them as such clearly would improve the usability to the council, I think. Commissioner.
Oh yeah, say one thing that we discussed was the nice thing that in the code is when it lists explicitly all these, it removes a lot of uncertainty. We really like the idea of saying what's the outcome, but that may cause staff to have to use more time. So we're balancing those 2, and it's in some ways it'd be very nice to say anything that has a lot of pedestrian use you can have in this location. But now who interprets what meets that threshold? And so that's what old fashioned, just listing out all the different explicit options is a lot of ways saves staff time, so.
Yeah, I think that might be true, but there are uses that we just don't see, including trade schools on University Avenue. And things like that that are just kind of don't make sense anymore. But also I think having some wiggle room for uses that don't fall into any categories could be important too. So.
Okay, great. I think that's, I will say that with respect to relaxing definitions, there's specific definitions that I think need to be looked at. And so when we recommend this to council, we can specify which ones we're thinking about. So for example, in Title 18, this is not meant to be exhaustive right now, it's commercial recreation. And it's not necessarily relaxed, it's like revisit, I think would be maybe the right word. Revisit definitions, many seem overly specific and complex, yeah. So it's commercial recreation, eating and drinking service, personal services, retail service, including the intensive and extensive retail services, retail-like use, takeout service. So that's kind of the list. It's like, 5 or 6 different numbered definitions in Title 18. So that's the specificity that we realized, this wasn't meant for public consumption necessarily, but we did want to share our thoughts. And so when I read it with that eye of looking at it for public consumption, I'm like, my goodness, this is not clear at all. So hopefully with that additional explanation, would that address your concerns, Chair? Like the ones that you voiced?
I think so, yes. I think when it comes back to us next, we should have more specificity in there, and then, because I think we'll want to do that for council. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the next bucket then.
Yep.
And if I could just mention one thing, one of the things with number 1 on this list was to do what uses are allowed where. That's really that comparative use schedule or use table. That's also a great way to highlight those differences, those specific definitions, because they're all listed in the table and most of them are defined. And then also it's a great way to make those comparisons between the various zones, the CC, the CN, CS in particular, and then also those the combining districts, the R and the GF in particular. So I think while those will take more time and more effort, that first effort of doing that table is a great way to start, because it really highlights those issues, and it kind of shows, well, why do we allow this here and not there? Or why do we require a CUP here and it's permitted over there? So it's a really good tool to facilitate those extra efforts, efforts that will take a little longer. So, anyway.
So I don't know if you're aware, but when I was hunting through our website, there actually is a table on our website, but that table I don't believe is included in the code. And so I think that's what MBI is suggesting, that we could use a table in the code itself. Is that right?
Yeah, the code actually has multiple tables. And so it gets a little confusing because there is overlap even between those tables. They're not mutually exclusive. And so you think you got the answer in one table, you really need to go look at another. And so for our purposes, we kind of created our own. And we're definitely going to provide that to staff. And the intent is actually we have that in our draft report. So it's there as kind of a point of reference and comparison. So you'll see what we're talking about there. And I think again, it's a good way to put it all in one place, and then that direct comparison typically shows any gaps or flaws or conflicts. And so it's a good way to do it. But yeah, the one that you're mentioning, Brenna, is I think from 2007. But it had that benefit. It's just out of date now. So what we did is similar. It's not, what we did is really focused on just those retail-like and personal service uses. That's kind of where we were focusing, and then looking again at those limited districts. But updating that table would be a great start. Okay. Sorry, let me move on to the next slide here. Okay.
Commissioner Aiken-Recton, do you want to take this? I'm happy to, but it was our three heads, so I want to make sure that one of you can speak as well.
Right, I'll take a stab at this and depend on my fellow commissioners in the ad hoc to correct me where I'm wrong. The idea behind the first one, well, the idea behind several of these are that cups are required more frequently than perhaps they need to be. And a great deal of the uncertainty faced by business owners is, am I required to obtain a cup? And if I am required, am I going to get one? So what can we do in order to reduce that uncertainty as part of the process? Well, the easiest thing to do is to eliminate the need for cups in as many uses as seem practical. For example, if a use really doesn't impact the street frontage, then perhaps we don't need to require a cup for it. The second case, if this situation exists, and this is another one where we're not sure it does, if you have a number of allowed uses, is there any situation where combining those allowed uses might require a cup? The canonical example is, do you want to put a restaurant in as an area in some other kind of business? Is that going to trigger a cup? We'd like to say, well, if you could have a restaurant next door and this other type of business next door, then the combination should also be acceptable. A more general approach to this, a little more challenging, but perhaps most effective in the long run, is to eliminate cups in situations where there's an impact that needs mitigation. So this is sort of CEQA in miniature. If there's no impact that you believe is likely to require some special action, then perhaps the cup shouldn't be required. Another case that came up in, I think this was mostly in the Cal Ave discussion, eliminate rules based on the nearby business types or sizes. And the issue there is that your nearby business types and sizes change over time and could change between the time you decide to buy a property and when you get your entitlement. So you want to eliminate that kind of uncertainty. To do that, you may have to depend on market forces to correct the temporary excesses. So if you get too many bagel shops or too many frozen yogurt shops in an area, you may just have to live with that for a few years until things fall out. And this came up in the Cal Ave discussion because, of course, on university, we don't have that kind of issue. And we frequently have waves of fad businesses, have had over the years. And they all shook out without serious negative impact to the retail environment. So we could trust that to apply in other areas as well. Now the hard one, rewrite parts of the code to make sure unsuccessful changes aren't locked in. So what you're looking for here is the ability to encourage experiment. Allow new retail uses or retail uses that haven't been employed in an area previously. But if they fail, not to penalize the owner for having made the attempt. And the example that came up early in the discussion of this was, if you have an office and you convert it to retail and the retail then fails, the retail use fails, should you be allowed to move back to an office use? And whatever you think the answer to that question should be, it's undeniable that it's very difficult to do that according to the code that exists today. Because, for example, you might be tripped up by the office cap. So solving this problem is another one of the probably multi-year efforts at rewriting the code. But we felt that we had some consensus that it was of value, and so it should be mentioned. Okay, any questions on any of that?
Just quickly add that numbers 1, 2, and 3 were sort of, these are principles that we had, but of course we don't know, we didn't have the data to see what cups we have, what the impacts would be. And so this is where we would rely on staff and their experience to determine if it's relevant, right? Because maybe number 2, eliminate cups for combinations of otherwise allowed uses is not relevant. So is it relevant? And then what the impact would be before it actually became a change.
Thanks. And that reminds me on number 1, perhaps some of the, one of the MBI folks would remember this, but one of our city comparables had rules that eliminated the use of cups for a certain depth from the street frontage. And that could be an approach we might want to consider for this kind of rule.
Oh, Commissioner Templeton?
Yeah, quick question. I assume these recommendations are solely within the context of the retail discussion. We don't mean eliminate cups, we mean.
Yes, all of this is solely within retail.
Just want to clarify, thank you.
No, that's a good clarification, and a point about, we were having an internal conversation, and then this was, we're glad it's shared, but we didn't think carefully about some of the implications.
So I was less enthusiastic about this section, and that is because if you think about how many CUPs that we've seen, depending on how long you've been serving on this, we don't see them that frequently. I am not aware that they are a huge problem, but I know that I assume their main use is to regulate businesses that we might think because we would be getting too many of them, which I understand you think the market will correct that over time, but also like for uses that might have impacts on, I think, residential uses nearby. I don't see them as a big problem, and I don't know if there's ever been the case of an office converting to retail. I sort of didn't understand that example. If there's a better example to explain that problem, what you think that problem might be?
Yeah. I mean, the first generation of the RPO was during the dot-com boom, where we've seen a lot of retail convert to offices. So they put a rule in that if something was ever retail, you couldn't switch to office over a certain period. There's a window of time, which means that if you now have an office and it's vacant and you convert to retail, according to that portion of the code, you can never go back to office. It's now covered under this first RPO.
Is that really an issue?
It's a one-way escalator. Well, but if we have an office that wants to try it, we want to encourage retail. And
right.
If they think they have a location where retail could work, I think we should encourage that. But right now they don't, because they would lose the office permanently then.
But there isn't office on the ground floor in retail protected areas unless it's grandfathered in.
Yeah, exactly. One of those grandfathered areas.
Yeah.
Just like right out here, there's some offices just on the first floor.
Because the problem that we've had is the other way is not really legal conversion of what should be retail to office.
Yes. We're not talking
So-
about that. We're talking about the one-way escalator of once you go from office to retail, you lose the right to go back to office.
Okay,
Or for any use. So take, for example, the housing development that we just saw on San Antonio. I think it was 800 San Antonio. They've included retail space, which is great. And we want to see them include that. But as currently written, our RPO disincentivizes that because it's now permanently retail forever and ever and ever. And so if we want the experimentation, obviously the better solution, and we allude to this later on, is to have additional retail nodes, sort of like CN, like protected retail areas in concentrated areas on San Antonio, on El Camino, so that all the new residents that will be coming in have some retail also. But so that's the way to solve it. But right now, because we don't have those defined retail nodes, if any individual developer wants to do some experimentation and put in a retail space, it's kind of scary because it's going to be now, assuming the RPO is not changed, that is going to be remain retail forever and ever and ever, even if it's not a viable spot.
I don't know. I think I'm wondering if staff has any idea of any data on CUPs, because I think they're a useful tool. And I remember at our last meeting, Commissioner Liu thought they kept people from even applying because they were so daunting. I don't know where that idea came from exactly, or whether staff has any data, but it's my opinion that mostly, and maybe staff has data on this too, once they're applied for, they're mostly always granted. Like, I don't ever remember I remember not voting for one or two, but I don't remember one being turned down. Ms. French?
I mean, anecdotally, I can say, a lot of people leave the public counter saying, oh, I don't want to pay $8,000 to come back and try for a CUP, and they go to a different location. So that happens a lot. I mean, I'm just saying anecdotally. So we don't see a lot of CUPs because we don't get a lot of applications.
Okay, it would be good to get that capture that data, because it would really show that the existence of the CUPs is making people not apply. And that seems like a bigger problem to solve than any that are listed here, actually.
Well, the other issue is that the PTC doesn't see the vast majority of cups. Most of them are approved by the director. And what we have heard anecdotally is from different business owners who have said that it takes a year to get a cup. And so if it takes a year to get a cup, now I don't know, again, we don't have the data, and each situation is individual. There might be some applicant error. I don't know what it is, but I have heard from a number of business owners that getting that cup, especially because a small business, isn't used to reading code, isn't used to applying for things. There's a typo, they don't answer one question, that causes a delay. And every month of rent for a small business is a really big, a small business like a mom and pop, that's just like a month of rent to you or me. And that's the impediment. So if it really takes even 1 month or 6 months and not a year, it's still a tremendous amount of money in terms of bottom line for that mom and pop. And so that, I think, is where those are the anecdotal stories that we're hearing.
Okay, well, I would encourage us to get more data on this area. And then with regards to eliminate rules based on types or sizes of businesses nearby, is that just rules that don't want too many nail salons? We always pick on nail salons in one area, or what were you thinking of specifically with that?
Yeah, that's the canonical example. I don't think we really understand why, but we have seen plenty of examples in our comparison cities of complex sets of rules that are of this type. And what this is a placeholder saying, do not go down this road.
Okay, because I wasn't aware we had a lot of that.
Yeah, and it would be a good idea not to follow that path.
I'm not sure you need to make that a recommendation then, if it's just,
Oh, negative recommendations have value too.
yeah. But it's not clear that's what you mean, so I would make that, I think we need to make that clear if that's what you're
All right,
saying.
perhaps the word avoid rather than
Avoid.
eliminate.
That's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah, yeah, because I didn't think there were any really, so I was confused. So that's a good clarification. What's that? Excuse me.
There was a question in the slides that said, what is the history of the nail? Why are we prohibiting nail salons? I don't know. I have some history of how that came to be.
Certainly, we
If
would
you would
love to
like.
hear that.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, this is just showing a little bit of research that I did regarding the nails. Why are we here? Why are we talking about nail salons? It was the council action in March of 2021 that was to prohibit allowing nail salons, beauty shops, barber shops directly on California Avenue street facing. So they were, I guess, welcoming for nails and hair on the side streets, but not on the main frontage. So then we got into it with Planning Commission in 2022, and then we got to that point where we were at the, do we send this ordinance forward or do we just keep it in the interim ordinance? So we kept it in the interim ordinance. So that's the nutshell what happened.
Sure, and that actually sort of dovetails with maybe reducing the boundaries so there won't be side streets. So I don't know, there's a lot of things involved, but thank you for that. I see a light from Commissioner Aiken and Commissioner Liu. And a hand from Commissioner Heckman.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to comment, follow up on something you asked about. Could we have the list of recommendations in group 2 back up again, please? Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's lost. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know.
If I may add one little bit about the CUPs or cups. One technique is if you have particular concerns and or even a history of CUPs for maybe certain types of uses, often you'll see that you've got several typical conditions of approval that kind of eliminate or mitigate the concerns with that particular use or type of use. If you can articulate those, then you can make those typical conditions standards. And if you've got those objective standards, then you're able to write them into the code and avoid doing a CUP. So it can be the use is subject to these special standards. Might be something if it's takeout or a takeout heavy use where there's outdoor dining. Make sure a common concern is disposable plates and cleanliness of the outdoor areas. Make sure things aren't blowing around and there's adequate refuse control, et cetera. So that could be something that can be written in as the standard conditions. So that becomes an automatic condition of that particular use. So that's just a technique to help move uses from a CUP level into a permitted by right level subject to special standards. So just I'll throw that out there as a technique.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Liu?
Yeah, a few comments and a few questions, I guess, just all kind of mixed together. So I think more data is definitely great and needed for me to get to a really firm place here, but I generally favor relaxing CUPs and think that the examples or kind of cases enumerated here make sense. Just for a clarification, when I was saying that CUPs could be prohibitive, I think that was in the context of a formula retail conversation about how you could get formula retail if you applied for a CUP. But imagine you're a pharmacy and you want to rent the Bank of the West space. You have to negotiate with the landlord. You have to draw pretty expensive architectural plans. You have to pay $10K plus to even apply for the CUP. And if you're a major project like a pharmacy, it's probably going to go to appeal and go to public meeting. And, that's even more money and even more time. And if you sign the lease and the CUP doesn't go your way, and that such a major CUP will probably get appealed and go to public hearing, then you might have to pay a breakup fee with your lease. If you don't kind of pre-sign a lease, then you also maybe lose a bunch of leverage with the landlord. So I think it just gets really weird. And I couldn't imagine a lot of pharmacies, for example, wanting to take the risk to move on to CalAV, in that kind of CUP for formula retail kind of world. But I think the same thing applies to a lesser extent for other kinds of businesses too. I was looking at some CUPs, and some of the CUPs are relatively small. It's like reconfiguring some of your outdoor seating, or kind of redoing your signs, or some are more major, like opening that boxing gym on CalAV. So there's a range. Based on the kind of examples I've seen in Building I don't really see a lot of particularly concerning CUPs that I feel like we would really need to remove. So I think for simplicity, for fees, for not discouraging businesses, I generally agree with the first view. One question though, from looking at Building I, is that it seems like most of the CUPs in downtown and CalAV are for alcohol. So it's restaurants, cafes wanting to serve beer and wine. Just to confirm, were we also thinking that removing CUPs for beer and wine would also be included in 1 through 3?
We did discuss that, but I'm not sure why it didn't make it into the list. Either of you?
I think it's just oversight on our part. If a restaurant, a full service restaurant is allowed, I know that oftentimes it's that alcohol permit that is the hang up.
Yeah, the only thing I remember bringing up to the contrary was the concern about open carry. But that doesn't affect the CUPs for the indoor uses, or I suspect even the parklet uses under current rules.
Yeah, I definitely would not. I'd be very wary about relaxing open carry in general, but I think if within your own parklet or within your own back patio or cafe space, you want to sell beer or alcohol, I'd support that. And actually, I know Santa Monica recently allows beer and alcohol for food businesses by right. So there's no CUP or a separate kind of permit required. And Santa Monica even includes kind of to-go alcohol, which I think is different from open carry. I think the concept is more like you can pick up a bottle of wine with your to-go dinner, or a well-bottled and well-sealed cocktail with your to-go dinner, and not necessarily you can consume that alcohol in the street. But yeah, I would be in favor of something in that direction, like alcohol by right for food businesses during normal business hours. And personally, I'd also support allowing that, including well-sealed to-go containers. I think there is probably some simple way to write that up.
Yeah, and there's a lot of state laws about alcohol and about serving alcohol that seem to be a holdover from a time when we were more judgmental, perhaps, about people consuming alcohol. And so we'd have to be in, the only time I see a CUP for an alcohol, the only time I remember is when it's the business abuts a residence. And then it's just sort of a concern about noise and that kind of thing. But I think I do know that a lot of the CUPs are for alcohol use. And so we should think about a recommendation around that. Commissioner Heckman has his, oh, were you finished? Sorry.
I had a couple more things.
Go ahead.
Maybe I'll just try to go quick.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I also wondered if we discussed temporary use permits at all. This seems to be a smaller case, but I do see that, you know, businesses do periodically apply for temporary use permits. They are $1,600 for seemingly modest things like grilling outside the front of Molly Stone's, or Equinox putting their bicycles in the parking lot for like a few one-off outdoor spin classes and things like that. That seems like a reasonable way to reduce uncertainty as well. Was there any consideration?
We just didn't discuss that. I mean, I think that's an exception as opposed to the rule, but as a long-term goal, we might want to look at that.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand the cost. Is it that we have to pay for staff time? Is that what drives $1,600 for the bikes in the parking lot? Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were still on the CUP.
Oh, temporary use permits.
Temporary use permits,
According
yeah.
to the fee schedule there.
So
Yeah.
temporary use permits often involve use of a tent, you know, for instance, and those have to go through fire department review for safety. There's some other things that involve perhaps the police department as far as, you know, managing the circulation traffic and this kind of thing. So I don't know why it's set at the amount that it's set. Often our fees go up incrementally year over year. So I don't know, you know, what started off as a nominal fee has just creeped up over time to stay abreast of just increases generally.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, maybe my last comment there is that I saw Santa Monica has a default length of their TUPs as 45 days, so same as Palo Alto, but they recently extended that to 180 days. So businesses that do get a TUP get more flexibility. And I saw that Santa Monica also, though maybe this is like unique to Santa Monica as a more touristy city, allows ancillary entertainment in a lot of businesses by right. So if a florist wants to have an open house and, I don't know, have a band play or something, they don't have to get a TUP just to have live music, or same with a restaurant or cafe or something like that. So I think something like that also might be a reasonable scope if we actually consider changing TUPs.
Okay. Are you finished? Okay. Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you. So I want to start with a question for the ad hoc committee, and that is the 5 recommendations we're looking at here. In your ad hoc deliberation, were there any of these that could be tackled in a relatively short time, or were all of these things that we're really talking about revising the ordinance and it would take some time? Are all these, you know, are some short-term and others long-term?
We talked about low-hanging fruit. I don't think we consider this low-hanging fruit, kind of medium-hanging fruit. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, especially the first 3. The intent was that those could be implemented in relatively short term.
Okay. So like with the first bucket, as this gets refined, we might want to indicate for council what our anticipated timeline is for the various items. All right, so turning to the items themselves, I'm supportive of 1, 2, 4, and 5, and want to talk about 3, but just a point on 1 and 2, to the extent we're talking about alcohol sales. So my understanding is alcohol sales, whether it's a bottle in a convenience store or a drink or a bottle at a restaurant, all of that is regulated by the state, by the ABC, and they look at impacts and they impose conditions. And I think it's something, I don't know that we need an answer today, but I think that staff and could work with Mr. Yang to see if the ABC's protections through their conditions is sufficient, because I think that might be the explanation for why as Commissioner Liu said, Santa Monica is, basically taking the hands off on the alcohol. It's not that people can do what they want in Santa Monica with the alcohol. It's because the ABC has already imposed a set of rules, and maybe they've determined that those are sufficient to protect the neighborhood. So I think that's something that we could look at related to 1 and 2. I really want to talk a little bit about CUPs because this description of 3 eliminate CUPs except in situations where there is an impact that needs mitigation. That is the description of what a CUP is, at least classically. In every zoning designation, and we'll just focus on commercial retail, there's a list of uses that are allowed by right? So for those, you just need a building permit and go build out your space, like a clothing store. But there are other uses that City Council has decided this is a kind of use we want, but it has the potential for unusual impacts that could be undesirable. And so we need to take a closer look at this kind of use and possibly condition it. And that's when you require a conditional use permit. It's in a situation where there may be, because of the nature of the use, an impact that needs, we say mitigation here, but it's conditioning, like hours of operation or other kinds of things. And so when we're talking about reducing uncertainty, there should virtually never be uncertainty over whether or not I'm going to get my CUP. It's a use that the council has already decided is desirable. The only uncertainty is what are the conditions that are going to be imposed, and can I live with those? And so there should never be really a discussion of, well, we can turn them down if there are too many of them on the street. And the only time where I would think would see a possibility is if, for example, on Cal Ave, let's say, an entertainment venue is allowed, but somebody controls a bunch of land and they want to propose a 6,000 seat arena that would absolutely overwhelm everything else. In that situation, you might turn it down because the impacts cannot be conditioned sufficiently to protect the rest of the neighborhood. But outside of that, outrageous suggestion, anybody applying for a CUP should be justifiably confident they're going to get it. They just don't know what the conditions will be. And the reason for that, and Commissioner Liu was talking a little bit about it, is the economics of this. We've got an application fee that is, I heard Ms. French refer to 8,000 and Commissioner Liu something over 10, but that's actually the cheaper part of the process, because if I'm opening a clothing store, I'm going to spend about $20,000 just to design the interior that I have to show the city. And if I'm doing something more complicated like a restaurant with a kitchen, then I'm putting up 50,000, 100,000 in the paperwork that supports the application. No way are people going to do that if they think I could get a no, right? That I could waste that money. And if we ever did that, I think it would have a chilling effect on what on the marketplace for people who are willing to come into Palo Alto. If I'm going to invest the money, I need to know I'm going to get a yes, and I'm going to reasonably expect conditions I can live with. So I think in situations where we don't reasonably expect an impact that's going to need conditioning, we should absolutely eliminate CUPs. And I think that the biggest benefit of that is to draw in more applicants who we have eliminated the fear that they are going to be turned away or obtain conditions that they can't live with. And I thought that Mr. Weary's description of sort of I don't know if he meant to replace I think he did. I mean, to replace CUPs in some instances with objective standards. So it's a matter of right, but I have these particularized rules and I have to decide if I can live with them or not. If I can't, I'm not going to rent that space. If I can, I'm going to take that space down and I'm going to make my use following those rules. So I think that's an excellent suggestion. So those are my comments on bucket number 2. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Aiken, Templeton, and Chang. Oh, Aiken and then Templeton.
Hi, just following up on the brain fault I had earlier. I couldn't remember what to follow up on, but I think it's been done more ably by Commissioners Liu and Heckman. This bucket is about reducing uncertainty. And to the extent that a cup introduces uncertainty, to the extent that the possibility of a cup introduces uncertainty, then people might simply not apply. So that was the follow-up to your earlier comments that I was trying to remember. The key here is the reducing uncertainty bucket, not simplifying the rules for cups bucket.
Commissioner Templeton?
I think it's really good to bring us back to the point of this bucket and maybe to understand that reducing uncertainty is not the whole sentence. It's so that we can increase the number of applicants, right? So, or the desire to bring retail to our city. So it might be too pithy for us to understand the full context with the current way it's done. But it's a really good point. The point I wanted to make, I think maybe Commissioner Heckman made it better than I will. But I really appreciated what Commissioner Liu said about looking for best practices in other cities. And, you know, if Santa Monica, which is in the same state as us, can do it, we can probably do it. So some of those ideas that might have been daunting in the past might be overcomable. I don't know what the right word is there, but in our current times, especially if we see other cities achieving more attractive circumstances, and if we want to pursue those. So thank you for bringing those up.
So I just wanted to say I really appreciated all the research that Commissioner Liu did on this. And I think that a lot of his ideas are things that I would love to see us include, including kind of investigation about the alcohol permitting and what's going on with what we require versus what might be covered by state law already. But also we did not discuss the TUPs, the temporary use permits. And I think they fall in much of the same bucket here. I mean, so it's like, how do we reduce barriers there? It's not about necessarily reducing uncertainty, but it's about reducing barriers and increasing vibrancy, because we've certainly heard from our residents that we want more music, we want more, you know, our retail areas to be more lively. And to the extent that and business needs to apply for a permit in order to make things more lively, there may be reasons that they need to, like safety concerns, et cetera. But to the extent that we could make it less costly for a business to do that, or, you know, we may want to, I just think we should investigate it. We may want to provide some waivers, or maybe it's once you have this permit, we extend the length of it. So I think those are very good ideas, because if we think it's a good use, you know, why have it expire at 45 days? Maybe we want it longer. And so we could consider changing the default to a longer date and then letting, you know, yeah, we could, I think we can look at it.
I agree, especially when it's a temporary use in what would otherwise be a vacant retail space. You know, we're not talking about a temporary use of a public park or something like that. And if you wanted to stay longer than 45 days, it sounds like you would have to pay another, I forget how much it was, $1,600, which to continue the use, which seems undesirable to charge people again if they just want to stay longer.
I will say, I think the dynamics of TUPs, it's hard to, piece together the story from Building I. There aren't actually a lot of TUPs, and I think to some extent, maybe people just, host their events anyways and don't bother applying. So like the mileage that we get here is not totally clear, but maybe just out of like cleaning things up and making it simpler for those businesses that do like go through the effort and actually do the TUP, like making it simpler for them too.
I don't have a memory of TUPs being used for like a pop-up or short-term business very often. I have a memory more of them being used for a use in a public park or something. And that would be different. I mean, I think we don't prohibit pop-ups, but we certainly don't want to make it difficult.
That's right. Oh, I just thought I might help the conversation by showing you the fees for CUPs. I have the list here that I can share with you because it does add a fee, quite an extensive fee, if something is called up for hearing before the Planning and Transportation Commission. So I'll show you that. And then to say something about the TUPs, a lot of the time what we see is pumpkin patches and Christmas trees, that kind of temporary use. I'm going to stop sharing the other screen and share my screen. So this just shows when it's alcohol added to a restaurant. Often we'll get the restaurant in there with no CUP. They get operating and they apply for their CUP to add wine, beer, alcohol, and that's a $4,536 fee. So that's just for the alcohol service. If it's a late night permit, that also is a fee, but that's at $8,000, I believe, because it doesn't say it might not be for alcohol service. So if you have a business that goes after 10, that's not an alcohol service place, that would require a pretty high price there. If it's called up, as I mentioned, to the Planning and Transportation Commission for a hearing, they have to pay an addition, and it's somebody else that might be calling it up, but the applicant is the one that has to pay the $14,000 extra dollars. So that's quite expensive for somebody that, might be a neighbor that is concerned about the use. And then it does go to the council after that.
Do those stack, or is that, for example, if you have to have a hearing, do you pay 8,000 plus 14, or is it just 14?
I believe it's just 14 because it's normally an administrative application, and only when it's called up for hearing do they have to pay the additional.
I would expect it's both, actually.
How do you prevent frivolous calls like that just to burn people's money?
Yeah, we're not in the business of determining frivolous anything. It's just somebody, if they pay, if they come in
the fee
and
structure certainly encourages that's,
yeah.
If anyone can call it and the applicant has to pay.
Right. It's not a cost that the appellant has to pay, I think.
Right.
Unless the appellant is the applicant.
That's what I'm saying. Like that just makes it easy for someone to punitively engage. That's a really interesting fee structure.
Yeah, so we do have a fee that is paid by the appellant as well. But it's only several $100s, and I think the policy behind that was so that, if a resident and neighbor was aggrieved, that it wouldn't cost them thousands of dollars to have a hearing on the issue. But that's the policy decision that the council has made. And I guess I would just say on all of these fees, the temporary use permit, why is this amount? These are all based on studies that have been done of how much staff time of various departments is required for these applications. And we're not allowed to charge more than it costs us in staff time.
Thank you for those thoughts. And then I think we're done with this one. We can move on to the next.
One more.
No, I know. We can move on to
Okay,
the next section.
So Does Commissioner Aiken want to take this one? It's up to you. I can do it. Cold calling him.
I'll start and you can chime in. So for the RPO, we want to protect resident serving businesses. But there has been some structural changes between working from home and also the, Amazon and all that web. The consultants believe that the retail demand in Palo Alto has gone down. And so what are you going to do if that is the case? What do you do with that extra space? And one thing you could do is have other resident serving businesses that aren't retail, that currently don't qualify in those areas, fill those spots. And so we're not necessarily getting rid of resident serving businesses. We're just changing the type that in those locations. But we also realize that there are some really pedestrian dominated businesses that really need that walk by business. And so we don't want to get rid of the RPO or loosen it across the board, but instead we're going to have two different areas, one primary, for example, University Avenue, and then secondary, maybe Lytton and Hamilton. And we would keep the RPO pretty much the same along the primary area, but loosen it outside of it to allow those vacancies to fill, but still provide businesses that residents need and want. And so these recommendations are that, first of all, that if you have the frontage, and one thing, especially with niche businesses, you may not need that full retail space. Right now, the RPO requires you to fill the whole entire business with retail. But if instead the front half of the business is retail, and the back half is, let's say, go to some therapist who wants to have a location there, that would be permitted under this proposal. The second one, as I mentioned, the RPO would apply to University Avenue, Cal Ave, and the neighborhood areas like Midtown. But then the secondary areas outside of those would be loosened. And
can I just quickly add? So
yes,
I think we're saying that kind of as a philosophy is how I would look at the recommendation 2, which is like the most, the most constraints or the most strict application of the RPO closest to the current RPO, we would want to keep on University Ave, Cal Ave, and CN zones. And as we start thinking about relaxing, then we could like selectively relax as we go out, maybe side streets or El Camino. So it was more of a principle rather than a specific recommendation. Yeah.
And the principle has the devil's in the details. What is the boundaries of that primary? Is it just university? Is it a half block off university? Downtown, we have Emerson and Ramona and Bryant, which are very vibrant retail areas. And we may want to include that also. Because if you have a vibrant area that requires a lot of pedestrians, if a dental office goes in there, you go from having hundreds of customers per hour to maybe a dozen customers per hour. And so that could be drastically change the foot traffic. So, but this is as Brianna says, that this is the principle of thing. And one is, where's those boundaries of that primary area? And the second thing is, what would we allow in that secondary area? We talked about medical therapists, but also some things like, could you distinguish between a local resident serving lawyer who does wills and estates, for example, as opposed to a law office who just has East Coast businesses, and really it's just an office, it's not a resident serving office. That's difficult to do, but what is allowed in that secondary is an open question. Then number 4, we talked about this last meeting about on Cal Ave right now, you can't have formula retail of any type. For non-restaurants, we would allow that. Anyone can come in. The Gap can come into Cal Ave. For the number 5, right now the threshold is 10, and we would loosen that. And there's some examples. Coupa Cafe has 9, El Fornillo chain has 18 restaurants. And so El Fornillo would not be permitted right now in Cal Ave, but we would loosen that to allow chains like that to be on Cal Ave. But McDonald's has 14,000, so we still would be a relatively small number of of chains here, members in the chain. But also, if you wanted to have a larger chain, you could still go through a CUP and make sure that it fits into the look and feel that you want on Cal Ave. The other thing was that there was some commercial constraints on commercial recreation in the code, and we had some questions about that. And we had punted that over to the consultant, and they explained some of the reasons for it, but they are arbitrary thresholds right now.
Well, I just wanted to add that we asked the question, if we relaxed it beyond 1,800 square feet, what should it be instead? Or sorry, if we wanted to lower the threshold for a cup from 5,000 to something else, what's the right number? And the number that the consultants came back to us with was something more like 3,000. And so that's something that we could consider doing. And I think just a quick, in terms of like short-term versus long-term, I'm not sure that these were ordered in that way. In other words, looking at any tweaks to the RPO are actually the longer-term items. Removing constraints on non-formula or removing constraints on formula retail, those are things that we believe we could actually do right away. And so this is the one, probably the 4 and 5 are the lowest hanging fruit that we think we could, as the PTC, make a very specific recommendation to council and hope that they could immediately implement that. And it might immediately make some of our vacant retail spaces more attractive. So that was one where the three of us thought could actually be fairly easily immediately implemented because it affects one definition in our code. It's a very limited section.
And I guess I'd add, just for non-restaurant formula retail, we believe there is a trend towards smaller, more differentiated versions of large formula retailers going into restricted spaces like this. It's Target that usually comes up in this discussion, isn't it? Yeah, but there are others. And in fact, there was a Cushman and Wakefield study on this suggesting that this is simply what has to happen as density goes up. The space per retail business goes down. And so if you have a fixed floor plate that you're trying to put retail into, that means you're going to be putting smaller, more specialized retailers into that space. So if this analysis is correct, then that's the outcome we would be likely to see in places like Cal Ave if we relaxed the restraints on formula retail.
I am not seeing any lights. I am in favor of relaxing constraints on formula on Cal Ave. I don't know that it will get us a bevy of applications, but it doesn't seem necessary to me at the levels. It doesn't seem desirable at the level at which we do it. I think the questions about changing basically the area of the RPOs is a pretty big discussion, but council has already done that downtown because they allowed medical, retail like medical on the side streets, but not on University. So that might be one way to do it. I don't know that I'm as big on, I think there's also a lot of vacancy in office building where neighborhood serving businesses could locate. So I don't know that that one is as attractive to me because it's not as if there's plenty of places for them to go right now too. They were sort of pushed out by, especially on Cal Ave because it's my downtown. There was the big boom in tech there that bought stuff and food and services during the day, also drove out some of those smaller neighborhood serving businesses. So I don't think that one is as attractive to me exactly. I see that Commissioner Heckman's hand is up. Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you. So I'm supportive of all of these concepts to relax restrictions. I think as Vice Chair Chang mentioned, perhaps a reordering of them to express to the council, our expectation of what can be done soon, what's going to take more. And I'm reading the first sentence of 2 and item 3 together. So we're looking at, again, these are concepts. Retaining the RPO for these designated locations, but in those locations, number 3, relaxing it for resident serving businesses. So if I'm not understanding how those tie together correctly, please let me know. I do want to kind of focus for a minute on 3 and just the concept of relaxing the RPO. One of the slides in the staff presentation had a definition of retail like, and I wonder if we could pull that up for a minute.
Let's see. Was in the questions? I think that's probably where it was here. Let's take out, hang on.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah. So I think, this is really what is informing that, or could be used to inform that relaxation of the RPO. And one of the things that caught my eye when this was shown, so when we're talking about retail, like, these are uses generally open to the public during typical business hours. One of the examples here is hotels. At our last PTC meeting, we dealt with an application for essentially the expansion of a gym, an exercise facility on Cal Ave. And some of the comments that came in from the public and perhaps from some of the commissioners were, that's not a use that's open to the public. And so you have a limited access. But I wanted to point out that as I did related to that item, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's open to the public, just like hotels are here, right? Anybody, any member of the public can stay in the hotel. You have to pay a fee to do it, just like to be a member of a gym or to take a class at a dance studio. But that doesn't mean it's not open to the public. It just means the public can't wander freely through all of the rooms. But even in those scenarios, there's cross-pollination, right? The people in the hotel frequent the stores. I'm staying in a hotel right now, and I just walked a half block down the street and bought dinner from a Chinese restaurant. They were grateful to have the hotel there to deliver me, to give them money. And that's how these retail-like uses, even when you can't wander through them, can still be a part of the fabric that delivers foot traffic to the rest of the street. So I think as we look at the relaxing of the RPO, this is really a question of how much relaxation. How many of these, if any, of these retail-like, or how far should we push it to fill the stores, to fill the storefronts on University, on Cal Ave, with uses that will bring people, a different group of people there who will use the surrounding uses for the benefit of the whole block. So I think we can go back to the primary bucket 3 slide, and those are my comments. Thank you.
So just to clarify, right now, the retail likes services are all allowed currently in the RPO, I believe. Almost all of them. There might be a few of them that require a cup but. So,
Thank you.
Commissioner Liu?
Yeah, I had a few comments. I am also generally supportive of all of these. I think the details on number 2/3, I'd want to figure out, of course, and see later. I'm generally more of a retail maximalist. So like I'm a little bit cautious about relaxing RPO along Lytton and Hamilton, for example, but maybe Cambridge or El Camino, like that could make sense. A couple of slightly kind of tangential kind of questions / potential suggestions. So I'm going to refer to San Monica again. They published a cheat sheet in like December of 2023 where they listed a bunch of their retail ordinances. So I'm just like drawing some inspiration, trying to bounce ideas off of that. They had a reference to allowing vacancies, non-conforming vacancies that have been vacant for more than a year to return to their previous use in a streamlined way. And I think that maybe it was also similar to something that Chief Planning Official French pulled up in the context of nail salons. There's also maybe like a bullet point or like an ordinance saying something that if the nail salon is empty for a year, it could be like refilled a year later. I wonder if there's some, like, if something like that has legs, like on Cal Ave especially, I imagine a lot of those buildings aren't conforming, or just across the city, things might not be conforming for parking reasons or other kind of grandfathered in reasons. And if they go vacant, can they still be refilled, or would they have to spend thousands of dollars like adding parking and kind of correcting those deficiencies? Like, do we know if that's a problem? If that made sense, I'm happy to try to explain it more concisely.
So there are instances, because we have a section of the code, for instance, that says if it was, there's a date in 2001 when we had the .com boom where, you know, if there was an office present in that space on that date, then there's, you know, and forever after, basically, you can have office. But so it's not the retail protection ordinance, it's the against office ordinance, I call it. So if it, you know, so that's what I'm kind of thinking of when you say that. There are certain dates that you have to prove that there was an office there. In fact, we have one on Cal Ave right now that's an office building. It doesn't even look like it could accommodate retail. And it's been an office building forever. But, you know, somebody wants to go in and put office there, and what if it's been vacated for a year? I mean, how can you put retail in that building? It just doesn't lend itself to retail. It'll be a fail.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying, well, like putting this in the retail context, I'm thinking about the old Zombie Runner or the Varsity Theater space. Like that space has no parking, of course, I think. And prior to AB 2097, it would have needed to have parking, right? So if it were vacant for a year, like, yeah, like how would that work? Like, could you still refill it?
Yes, because there was a parking assessment district.
Okay.
So that for Cal Ave.
And even after the assessment district ended, there was that restriction because the code had parking ratios that were different for different uses, not like downtown where it's a blended rate of 1 per 250. In Cal Ave, if you went from retail to restaurant, you need one space for every 60 square feet of restaurant area. And so you couldn't put a restaurant in there because you didn't have enough parking.
Yeah, that was specific to Cal Ave, and I have spent 7 years trying to get rid of it, but the state did it for us.
Okay.
Because it actually kept businesses from going in because they had a different.
Right.
It was not good, really.
Right.
So, but there is a law about if vacancy, which Ms. French explained, if you have a non-conforming like ground floor office use, if it's vacant for a year, you can't continue the office use. But I don't think that happens very often. But so that's the concept of a vacancy triggering triggering a change of use is one that is in the code.
Okay. So, okay, so I can imagine there might be other edge cases that I can kind of think more and just try to look on Google Maps to think about whether this is a real restriction and potentially follow up on. But yeah, I just wanted to air out that concept of like, if something non-conforming goes vacant, can it still be refilled in a reasonable way? Okay, yeah, and thank you. Those were my comments.
Okay, yes, Commissioner Chang.
So I had a thought because Commissioner Liu had raised it as an idea. And he said, well, what about, food halls? Are they allowed? And I mean, from my limited understanding, I think they are allowed, since you can have smaller spaces within, or multiple tenants within one large space. And that is something to think about, because as the ad hoc was discussing it, we were thinking, okay, if it's too big of a retail space for the way retail kind of works today, what do we really want to lock it in? Because it might be a large retail space that nobody wants to fill. And we need to broaden our thinking to extend, because the RPO is a citywide ordinance, right? We might not want to change it for Cal Ave, say, or University, but maybe what if there's a large space on El Camino or somewhere else, or, San Antonio or something. And so the question, so as we were thinking about relaxing it potentially, we were thinking about some of these other areas where, gee, it's a really big space. Would it be so harmful to have retail only in the front, I don't know, 50, 100, whatever the right number of feet are for a certain square footage. But then when you brought up the food hall idea, like, you actually need big spaces for that. And if you start giving away all your big spaces, then you preclude something like that from happening. So that was just an interesting, kind of side effect to some of these proposed principles and recommendations, that there might actually be these new uses that are quite vibrant that we might want to have some big spaces for. So just a thought.
A big thing that we want to get is, are there any unanticipated consequences that these proposals might bring up?
Well, I can see one with the customer-facing frontage position, and that is that we have had what we like to call faux tail examples, where people have basically pretended there was a non-retail use that wanted to locate in RPO, pretended they have stuff in the window so it looks like they're selling stuff, but it's fake. It's just a front for the office behind it. So I won't mention any names, but so that I would worry about that.
Yeah, if you relax what's allowed in the back, and that's lucrative enough, that will happen.
Yeah. So
they'll have a strip of.
There's just a game to be played there, and that will happen. So I think that's my biggest fear with that. And then, and we've seen that happen anyway. And we know that multiple businesses can share a space. We don't prohibit that at all. I mean, you think about Printers Inc., it had 4.
Yeah, but RPO wouldn't allow that if that back portion was not retail.
Yeah, I can see a slippery slope. I can see danger in that one with fake retail.
And the other thing is, we want to do no harm, right? Just like doctors, is that we don't have to do this all in one big bite. And we can take some small steps along the way and see how it's going. And if that works well, maybe extend that. And so keep that in mind too.
Commissioner Liu, you had your light on.
I was thinking a little bit more about food halls. They are an amazing use that I love whenever I travel and can actually go to a food hall. And it seems something that's so specific, it might not actually be a good practice to make explicit in our zoning and even add incentives in for our zoning, because I imagine that some things are maybe not totally clear, like the food hall has a bunch of different uses. How do you calculate the square footage of each use required for parking and things like that? There might be some ways to clarify or gently incentivize it, but then I guess it's an open question of whether it's even worth doing that because it's just so specific for a use case that doesn't even exist in the city that we don't have applicants for. Yeah, I mean, that could be something to consider. Another kind of random one-off thing to consider is potentially clarifying rules for rooftops. I know that council did clarify rules for rooftops in downtown in 2019 and kind of set some rules about like, oh, if you need auxiliary square footage for like stairwells, or if your awning goes a little bit above the height limit, then that's okay. I think there might be some reasonable, like nice chill rooftop on Cal Ave that's like 30 feet high that literally wouldn't bother anybody, that could have rooftop use, that could be clarified. But again, it's potentially too wonky or too specific to try to clarify or incentivize something that like no one is asking for. So also just want to throw that out there.
I don't think it's rooftop use is prohibited on Cal Ave.
Yes, but it's just like clarifying it or gently incentivizing it with those clarifications.
I think that the food, what did you call it? A food court?
Food hall.
Food hall. I think we have those from time. I mean, we had one on Cal Ave. It went out of business. It was like 5 or 6 different.
Analytic coats on University Ave.
Yeah. So I think we allow that. It's just, and we wouldn't discourage it already. Anything else on this section?
We've been talking about zoning and retail. The number of people who've mentioned Liddy coats to me is amazing. People really love that. And I'm surprised that it will, Liddy coats, the food hall that was downtown University.
Yeah, so originally it was a grocery store that went way back, and then it was converted. A lot of that facility was used.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. Became Z Gallery and then the Apple Store.
Okay. Anything else on this section? Not seeing anyone. Do you want to move on to beyond zoning?
Sure. So I think for beyond zoning, you guys have all read the packet, so I might flip it around now and just say, just open it up to commissioner questions or thoughts about those items.
Okay. I had a question about, what number is it? 5, which proactively plan for new CN nodes on El Camino and San Antonio. I'm wondering what that means.
Okay, so I don't know that it should be specifically CN. It might be good. We were sort of like, retail nodes, I think is what we were thinking of. Whether CN zone is the right one for it, I don't know. But the idea is that the retail on El Camino is somewhat spread out and is interrupted. And so as we think about housing going in and wanting to make sure that there are services for residents that are new residents as well as the current residents, because right now we haven't said there must be ground floor retail in certain areas. And so what we're going to end up with if we don't plan is just either podium parking along El Camino or housing which is also not that attractive for the people who live in the housing. And so if you look at surrounding cities, like Menlo Park has a development, Redwood City has some, Cupertino and Sunnyvale have many developments that are housing developments, but then have ground floor retail that makes it a really attractive place to live and that also serves non-residents as well. The thought is that if we specify that there's, these blocks or, this block that's all retail, that would be something that would be desirable for the city going forward. And so rather than the current retail protection ordinance, which sort of says everything along El Camino that's retail must stay retail, maybe we want to focus on certain areas and then concentrate that so there's actually kind of a node that makes it a place that's desirable to visit. for all. So that's the idea. So kind of planning is basically what that number is.
Yeah.
Well, I think you want to change it to retail nodes,
Yes.
not CN, because,
That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
and then, yeah, and people have talked about that before I believe it's referred to as a string of pearls. But that it didn't have to be retail the whole way, which is basically Page Mill and South. But that we, and I think that's worth doing, but I mean, this ship is sort of sailing on San Antonio with regards to retail. And I believe the new zoning on California, on El Camino, between Matadero and whatever, I don't think we require retail there. So if I think it's very important for these new developments, especially San Antonio, to have retail, but then we should really require it. And in nodes, it makes some sense, but
But one big thing is that if we are looking to relax RPO or widen the variety of business that can go in it, we may not want to do that broadly along all of El Camino. We may want to concentrate, say, no, we want this to be, we want critical mass of retail at this location, but maybe further up where it's more sparse, that would have more freedom.
yeah, so that's interesting. I think that it's if the devil's in the details with that, doing that right. So and then I think that's sales tax. I think that's all I have on beyond zoning. Does anyone else have a comment? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the first three. Mostly what we're talking about here is restrictions, but we should have a palette of other options that are incentives. And this is outside the scope of what PTC does, but it's an idea that needs to be captured for council to consider, and that's why it's here. I think the original one that came up was, could we attract specific business types by saying, let's offer sales tax relief to pick a business type, bookstores? Could you then encourage a bookstore to establish on University Avenue? But the concept is more general than that. And the idea of applying incentives to reduce vacancy rates for retail also generalizes. There is this idea that one of the reasons to have more housing downtown is that it provides more customers for retail. But in fact, you could achieve a better result more quickly because it requires less physical redevelopment by simply encouraging more occupancy of offices that already exist. So the general concept of finding incentives to reduce vacancies is what's covered by these first two items. And then Vice Chair Chang said, well, we need to be specific and say, you really need to think about whether a general vacancy tax is a valuable thing to do. Our consultants from MBI have provided us with a good bit of information on vacancy taxes for the retail case, but applies in other cases too. And this is something council should look into or direct staff to look into.
Yeah, I think it's something, and I see that Commissioner Heckman's hand is up.
Just a quick stylistic suggestion, again, as we move this toward council, since this group of ideas is outside of the PTC purview, maybe think of the current heading ties to the first three slides, but this is not really PTC recommendations as much as considerations for council beyond zoning. Something like that, that just tells the council that we understand this is outside of our realm, but we thought about it and what, we thought you should think about it too.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, then would you like to make any final comments, wrap this item up? Okay, Ms. French, do you feel that this has been giving you direction? I guess the ad hoc is still working. So is this good direction so far to keep us on track?
I feel it is. Dan, is there any follow-up questions that you have? I know we'll be seeing the ad hoc and talking about the next study piece of this, which is the parking and AB 2097 and the effect of that. Right.
Yeah, I thought this was really, really good discussion. I appreciate it. I took so far 4 pages of notes, so very, very helpful. And I think this will definitely, even though some of these may seem a little vague, it's good direction. And then the details can be worked out with specific draft amendments that follow these principles and go for these objectives. And then you'll hear those again, obviously. So I think there's some very good ones. I had one or two thoughts just on the last idea in terms of nodes, and we can talk about this at the ad hoc too, but often we look at when you've got a long corridor like this, trying to focus the retail on the corners. Those tend to be the best retail locations. And then those mid-block areas are more suitable for the softer uses, the residential uses and things like that. So that's just kind of a general pattern that can lead to that string of pearls example. So corners are very important. And then also in terms of requiring ground floor retail in a mixed use development, again, maybe in those nodes, you might require it. In other areas, you might do what we call retail ready. So you design it so that the space can be flexible and it can change with the market. So, because a lot of times that market won't be there for years, but if you design it correctly, then if there is a growth and a demand, then you've got a suitable space where somebody might come in and put in a retail or a commercial use or something that requires typically a little more headroom, for example, on the ground floor than maybe just a standard residential unit. So a couple different approaches we can talk about at the ad hoc committee. But again, overall, I think really, really productive, really good recommendations, very thoughtful.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you to both our consultants. And unless anybody has anything else, I think that concludes this item. Thank you very much. Would the commission like to take a break or carry on? Break? Okay, we'll take about a 7-minute break. Okay. We're back, everyone, and we're on to the next item number 3, which is our work plan. So I think staff probably has a presentation.
Yes, just a brief presentation in your packet. We have some recommendations and some goals and raving about our accomplishments. I'll just say we've had a big year and we're talking about the fiscal year 2023 to 24. We're not done with it yet. So in any case, this is the recommendation that we would review the accomplishments of the past year's work plan ending in the end of June and look at the goals for the next year. I'll say that we had 13 goals last year and looking at 8 goals for the coming year. I think it's a reasonable number. This is showing the analysis of that. So these are the goals. There are 4 goals that are carried forward with revisions, 3, 6, 7, and 13. And then we have a number of goals that I believe we met or will have been fulfilled during this term. Ending in the end of June. So that's on the screen and the packet as well. Then we have our just written out here, 8 goals. Within some of these goals, like state legislation implementation, we have certain things. And then, for instance, within the comprehensive plan policy or program implementation, we have a lot of things. And then housing implementation, a lot of things too, things being programs that we would bring back. Not very descriptive, is it? But that's in the report. Also, I did a quick check with all of the council priorities and objectives to see how those relate to our goals for the coming fiscal year and put that in the report as well as on the screen. So the council priorities are economic development and transition, climate change and natural environment, housing for social and economic balance. Did I move it? And what's the last one? Okay, so these are implementing housing production policies, which carries forward. There's a bunch of those. And then the renter protection policies, which we are finishing up in this term. So I think that that takes care of it. And I can go back to, if the Planning Commission would like to talk first about the accomplishments, take a look at the plan. I didn't put the plan itself on here, but you have it in your packet.
Thank you for that. I don't know if anybody has any questions for staff. And if not, I'll ask if there's any members of the public who wish to speak. I doubt it, Ken.
I have no request to speak.
No, okay. So why don't we bring it back for discussion? Would anybody like to talk about any of the items that Ms. French briefly went over, or past achievements? I think there was a 4th council. Wasn't there a fourth priority, which was diversity, equity, inclusiveness, and belonging, I think.
Yeah, and I didn't put that on because I don't think there were any related PTC tasks. Sorry about that.
Thanks. So I see that Commissioner Aiken has a light.
Yeah, just a clarification first. Do you want to stick to accomplishments, or do you also want to go ahead to comments on goals?
I'm open to all and anything. So.
All right, well.
Sorry, and I should add that we do have Nate Baird here, who I asked to come for the parking goals. So he is representing transportation on the parking goal. If you have questions for Nate, sorry to interrupt.
Okay,
great.
Thank you for that.
That's good to know. All right then. First of all, thank you for a beautiful piece of simplification and organization here. I generated this long list of things I wanted to see in the goals, and I kept over and over again finding you'd already covered them. But I did have a few things that I wanted to ask about. One is simply typographical. I believe in one place we refer to retail ordinance updates. Let's see, there's two.
Can you refer to packet pages? That would be helpful.
Working on that now.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So first, packet page 31, we have goal 1 listed as road safety, but on packet page 35, we have it listed as Safe Streets for All Safety Action Plan. And I liked road safety better. I would recommend sticking with that. And also on packet page 35, retail ordinance updates. I wondered if we're actually looking at something more general than that. Someone might read that and think it was only about the RPO. So perhaps retail development or retail support, something along those lines. One question I have heard from the public several times in the past year is about tree canopy improvement, particularly in South Palo Alto. And I wondered if we wanted to call that out as either something in goal 8 for the comp plan, or perhaps that could be part of the area plan for San Antonio. And last one is open space development. Since we're behind on our nominal goal of open space per resident, perhaps that should be named specifically for goal 8 as well. That's all I had. Thank you.
Sorry, can you just repeat the last sentence that you said? I couldn't hear it.
Oh, sorry, about open space development. Yeah, since we're behind on our open space per resident goals, I was wondering if open space development should be called out as one of the specifics along with the other comp plan goals in goal 8.
So those were additions for goal 8 that you.
Well, the open space development would be an addition for goal 8. The tree canopy improvement, I wasn't sure whether that should go into goal 8 or whether we should fold that into the San Antonio area plan. But yeah, get it captured somewhere since that's come up as a public comment several times. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Heckman?
So I want to start by confirming with staff that the mission statement at the beginning of the new work plan is unchanged from the current work plan.
Let's see. So packet page 34 is about the commission. Is that what I'm trying to find? What I don't see mission statement.
Yeah, about the commission. Then under that's the heading current commission. That
oh, there it is. Okay.
Mission statement. I presume
have not changed that from the prior year work plan.
Okay, good. I just wanted to confirm. So I think if there was truth in labeling, then this document should really be called Planning Staff Work Plan for PTC, because the planning staff has really done all the work here of looking at our current plans, goals, figuring out which one we have or will have completed by the end of this fiscal cycle, and then carrying over some, teeing up some new ones, tying those to council objectives. So it was a lot of work. And even though it's our work plan, we didn't have to do any of it so far, other than doing the things that are the accomplishments for this year. So I want to thank staff for that. I think our primary function here, other than to identify some of the nuances, as Commissioner Akins just did, is really this is an opportunity for us to identify things that are not on the menu that we think should be on our menu for the coming year. And I think in our past couple of years with the work plan, that's been one of the most interesting parts of the somewhat short dialogue we have when this item comes before us is if any of the commissioners think, there's something's not here, but at least that commissioner has a real interest in engaging us because so much of what we do is reactive. So I don't actually have anything like that, but I'm interested to see if any of my fellow commissioners have looked at that and think that there's a goal 9 that we should really be making part of the work plan for the coming year. So thanks again to staff.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Chang, and then Commissioner Liu.
Yeah, I had a, first of all, yes, thank you. This is excellent. Thank you so much for all this work. I'm glad I didn't have to do it. So I had a couple questions. The first one is for area planning. When we say this San Antonio Road area, what does that include? Is it only San Antonio Road, or does it also include like all the Rome and the GM area?
So it's good that you're asking. So we're engaging currently in a scope of work that we're sending out for the RFP. We're literally today, we're looking at the maps to see where those boundaries would be. We had 2 exercises recently regarding San Antonio and boundaries. The first was we call it BASA, Bayshore Alma San Antonio PDA, that we got approved and is now a thing, which kind of snakes along Alma and where it touches San Antonio. So there's a row of religious institution sites pretty much, and then touches Alma and then goes along Alma and out past 101 to capture the home key area. So we are looking to use that boundary in our RFP to include that little piece along Alma, along San Antonio, and then yes, a bunch of the GM ROL area south of San Antonio, as well as going up to Fabian and crossing over Fabian a bit.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Because yeah, I wanted to hear that like all of that South Palo Alto, area would be included in this effort. So that's perfect. Thank you. The next question I had was regarding the parking programs. And so this one's for Mr. Baird. I just was wondering, because right now on packet page 36, it's pretty general. Just says kind of improve parking operations. And I know a couple years ago, pre-pandemic, or kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, we heard a presentation at the PTC about a lot of different parking efforts. And like there was a Gantt chart of when we would see different things. And so I'm wondering if you can just add a little bit more color in here so that we as the commission can understand what types of projects are going to be coming towards us, or what are the big pieces of work that will be done with respect to parking programs.
Sure, there's definitely certainly a lot in those previous items that we will still be considering and working through, but the main piece that we'll be working on this year is taking a look at the downtown in particular. Of the works that we presented in the previous years, there was kind of some policy updates that we did focused primarily on the residential preferential programs, particularly with the pricing and some other policies that we adjusted. So what we want to do now is kind of bring some attention to the downtown in particular, and we will need a parking vendor and some adjustment to our enforcement teams to make some of the proposals possible. The main kind of customer pain point that we're dealing with in downtown is that you don't have any ability to stay beyond the 2 or 3 hours. So if you stay beyond 2 or 3 hours, you have to pay for a whole day. So what we'd like to do is be able to bring in some mobile payment options, or so the ability to extend your stay beyond those 2 or 3 hours. We will also be looking at whether we can introduce some better curb management options in the downtown, and we will just need a new vendor. So currently the only permits we provide downtown are provided by revenue collections in the AS Administrative Services Department. So we'll need to bring on a vendor to help us provide some more options. And we'll be bringing again, we previously talked about some of the adjustments to the Muni code that we would need to provide some more flexible permit options. So we'll be bringing that as part of the package as well. And so once we roll out, part of that will include a customer survey that will be going out in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, to downtown visitors and businesses, employees to just talk about what mobile payment options would be preferred, what sort of an extending your stay might look like. And then we'll bring on some vendors, hopefully have some vendors showcase like what the different options could be. And so we would bring to PTC some of those options and also some of the Muni code updates that we would need to make those options possible. And then from there, we would hopefully bring someone on, and then as things are successful, as things work out, we would bring them to the rest of the city potentially, or other commercial areas at the very least.
Okay, thank you. So like the downtown parking effort is what is sort of slated for next year. Is that correct? And because I just remember us talking about automatic license plate readers and some of those things. So that was all kind of feeding into this effort. Is that right?
Yeah, so we did bring on license plate recognition into the RPPs. So we would be looking at bringing similar enforcement technology into the downtown, as well as part of kind of learning from what we've done previously and moving it forward.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a final question or final comment about the project goal 8, and just a comment that I liked the additions or the suggestions that Commissioner Aiken flagged around the tree canopy for South Palo Alto, as well as open space development.
Commissioner Liu.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the goals. I appreciate the conciseness and just the relative clean, kind of low number of goals that, have a lot of depth. I had one specific question on goal 1. So road safety, or safe streets for all, I guess, kind of alternatively described. One thing that I liked in this past year was, and this was truly a one-off, the Crescent Park traffic calming item that we covered. That seems like an important part of overall road safety. Are there other plans to actually hear items like that, potentially covering Lincoln and Middlefield or other intersections? And could that be included in the scope of goal 1?
First of all, the Crescent Park, is that something, just to back up to the accomplishments? Is that's maybe I missed that because in the accomplishments, I can add that.
Yeah, that can be. I think that is an accomplishment. We did that did get approved, right, by the council. So yeah.
If you'd like me to specifically cite that, I don't have the Office of Transportation headspace to say whether that is something they could add to their work plan in Office of Transportation. I don't know, Nate, if you're still here, but if you know there's different segments of.
Yeah, I'm not really equipped to address this question, unfortunately.
I can say a little bit about Lincoln and Middlefield because I've talked to Mr. Rios about it. And the current thinking is that that's done.
It's done?
There are no plans to do anything more at the moment.
Well, Ms. French, I'm trying to understand what you said a moment ago. Are you saying Transportation Department didn't review our goals?
Oh, I did. I met with Sylvia and Philip, and I met with Nate to help me put this together. So that's why, for instance, road safety from last year's plan became Safe Streets for All Safety Action Plan as a title. But Sylvia suggested
for the accomplishments section, we think we just missed one. Is that what I'm trying to understand what you were saying?
Yes, sorry, it will come on the mic more. If I missed it, I might have missed it. There's a lot to cram in a little tiny space with all those tiny fonts down there. So I can add that if I missed it.
Okay, but you're saying that you guys did work on it and probably this is a miss and not an absence of input from transportation.
Yeah, no, I did. I mostly worked with them on the goals. I did send them this to see if they had anything to add for the accomplishments, but I'm happy to, before we package this for council, to meet again with them specifically on the accomplishments.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, we've been working really hard over the past few years of making transportation feel welcomed and invited and an equal partner in this planning and transportation commission. And I'm getting really frustrated because it seems like we're backsliding in some of these areas. I just want to invite them to be present. This is really important stuff. Thank you.
Commissioner Liu, were you finished?
I guess just a brief note. I would love for us to get to the point where we can kind of go through traffic calming measures and safety improvements really regularly as a group. And that's news to me about Lincoln in Middlefield. I am somewhat disappointed overall that we won't have opportunities to actually ship real safety improvements, since the current goal seems entirely scoped around the plan, and not any of the other things that I think we theoretically have in our budget or theoretically have some staff time for. So I'm just not sure why it's not part of the goal.
I just know that the thrust of the upcoming effort is, I think, super focused on the Safe Streets for All Safety Action Plan. I think that's what I got from the folks I met, that's the focus.
And that could include a lot of different things also. So, but I take your point about it, wanting to see it there explicitly. Commissioner Templeton, you have your.
Thank you. That is the item I want to discuss as well. Is there someone from the transportation team who can weigh in, or do you want to represent? He said he was exclusively for parking.
Right, Nate is here for the parking item because that was, I had a request to have that.
Which is great.
Resource.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Baird.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ms. French, I assume you're gonna wear your partnership hat with the transportation team for these questions. I guess I'm just looking at project goal number 1, and it sounds like several of us are concerned with this area. I'm reading the high priority. Safety for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists is important. Reducing and/or eliminating injury and death resulting from collisions is important priority for many residents. Are there any residents who are just for reducing deaths? I mean, do we not want to have an aspirational goal here? I'm not sure about the and/or. I guess I'm trying to say, can we say we want to?
It's at the pleasure of the commission. It's your work plan. I mean, I know it's staff's work plan too, but that's a phrase, reducing and/or eliminating injury and death. If you would like to modify that, it's
well,
your.
I'm trying to ask where it's from, and I understand you're not prepared to answer that question, but I would invite my commissioners to say, what if we were ambitious here in our goal and said we wanted to eliminate, maybe eliminate the deaths. I feel, and severe injuries. We only have injury here. I think we're talking about severe. So I would just encourage us to try harder there. And then for the lower priority, the challenges in this area are addressed. I mean, why is that a low? This frustrates me because I don't want to, say it's important and then not do anything about it. Those seem to me to be two parts of the same thing. I don't understand why addressing those challenges that are causing collisions and severe injuries is a second priority. And I think that's what we're hearing from the other commissioners as well, because we want to be specific, and perhaps the lower priority might be an ordered list of what areas we address first. And that might address some of the concerns that Commissioner Aiken and Commissioner Liu and the others of us have. But currently as written, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So
yeah, I guess my interpretation of this chart that they gave us as a template, lower priority, the higher priorities are listed under that box, and the lower priorities are, I think that's been interpreted as there are things that are lower priorities, but we're kind of handling them on an ongoing basis as the lower priority part of this. I can't say what those lower priority items are.
And please pass that feedback along to the Department of Transportation, because they need to show up for stuff like this. And I'm frustrated. I'm not frustrated with you. I'm just frustrated that we can't have an actual dialogue with this time we've set aside on a late night. I hear what you're saying. I think the intention is understood. I think for clarity's sake, we could do better with these two things and specify what we're going to do to reduce, how we're going to reduce, and maybe even promote our plan that we have. And then for the lower priority, I would suggest listing through some projects in priority that are maybe in progress that for this year that we're going to look at. Presumably those are known. But that's my feedback. Thanks.
We can certainly have the conversation and come back at the next Planning Commission meeting, Planning and Transportation Commission meeting with refinements to goal number 1 after conversations.
That's a great suggestion. I hope that can work out. Thank you.
Okay. I agree with some of the comments already made by my colleagues, especially Commissioner Aiken's idea about adding tree and open space development and more detail on parking. I think the boundary that was answered actually. So I appreciate the conciseness of this document. It got kind of unwieldy last year, and I really appreciate that you do it. And also, I think this is a template that was provided to everybody. So what do you put in the lower priority box? It's all a priority, and it's somewhat at fault of the template too, maybe.
Fair enough. I'm giving my feedback nonetheless.
Yeah, so if we can refine that one a little, it sounds like we're pretty much where we need to be. You need a motion, right?
Oh, that would be great.
Excuse me. Is anybody ready to make a motion, or are there more comments? I wasn't seeing any lights, so.
So what was the staff?
Page 28.
Okay, so I move that we approve this work plan with the additions suggested by Commissioner Aiken, with a little bit more color in the parking programs, and then with some expansion and a lot more detail for project goal 1. A little more work there.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Would you like to speak to your motion?
No, I think it's all just.
Okay, if there's no other discussion, we can go ahead and call the vote.
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Rekdal,
Yes.
Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you very much. All right, moving on to our last item of the evening. Item 4, and this is a study session on basically changes in state laws. So I'm not sure what exactly.
I will share my screen.
Okay.
I have a brief presentation. So, we have a plan and we have a set of laws. So excuse me while I get to, okay. I don't know if you all follow Alfred Twu. He does these wonderful illustrations of all the state laws that are that have passed. And he, of course, tracks them through the year. And he has just released, and I can forward to you if you haven't seen it yet, his 2024 laws that are in the legislature. Lots of laws there. And then by the time they get adopted, the list gets whittled down to the ones that were just adopted. So this was from 2023. We did provide to the commission an informational report back in November of all the 2023 laws that got adopted that were related to everything that we care about. So what I just pulled up here for tonight is just a couple of housing laws. As you know, having just passed our housing element, we have a bunch of programs that we are going to be implementing coming forward. We have our work plan on that, but there are some state laws here that that we're kind of focused on and talking about getting something before you at the end of May, working with Albert, who is also on the call. So this is just highlighting two of these, SB4 and SB 684. SB4 is affectionately known as YIGB, yes to God in my backyard, or something like that. And so that's where housing can be, low income housing on both college and religious institution sites. And then SB 684 is for faster approvals on projects with up to 10 homes. So I have I have a bunch of notes on each of those that I can show on the screen because we didn't produce a packet on this, but this kind of gives the highlight. So these were effective as of this year, January 1st. This is the YIGB law. So this kind of sets out what the specifics are, and we can't do more parking requirements if it's within half a mile of high quality public transit. We've got streamlined design review using ministerial criteria. So basically it's objective standards again, that we've got to tie into some of these sites. Many of the religious sites are zoned R1, and our objective standards that were passed that came through this group and ARB and went to council were focused on other zones besides R1. So that's that one. And then 684 is regarding projects with 10 or fewer parcels and 10 or fewer residential units in zones allowing for multifamily residential and no larger than 5 acres. So that's another one that we're looking at, and that's going to go into effect this July, so July 1st. So I know it's a lot of text on the screen, not expecting you to digest it, just a little sneak preview. Just wanted to quickly go over some other ones. These were effectively put into the ordinance that you saw recently that is going to council on May 6th, I believe, for approval. The density bonus laws in chapter 1815. And then we have some parking items. So with AB 2097 from 2022 that became effective in 2023, you're all familiar with the radius around the train stations and the fact we can't require parking except for hotels and event centers or something. Exactly that. But we have a code that talks about you have to put parking, and we have a code that talks about if you have parking, then there's some other, required parking, there's some other things you have to do. And so we have a couple of things I'm just putting in bullets that we would like to discuss and maybe bring forward some tweaks to our zoning code related to AB 2097. So far we've done with that is maps that show the areas and, handouts that give the overview. So we have implemented it with information education. There are some other laws from 2023 that go into effect, are in effect now, or one that will go into effect in January of next year. And those are on the screens: SB 712, AB 894, AB 1308, AB 1317. So we're looking at those. Then we just have some cleanup items. You'll be seeing the NV cap on May 8th. And this is just an example. When we're doing a zoning code for NV cap, we want to, those are new zones, right? Zoning districts. And we have parts of our zoning code that, for instance, this one, 1842-040, that calls out late night uses need a CUP. And they don't mention the NVCAP zones because they don't exist yet. So that's just an example of cleanup clarification. And then here's one that is of interest because it's about ADUs. So, by 2025, we want to have a program where we have pre-approval of some floor plans, this kind of thing. And we're part of the planning collaborative of Santa Clara County Cities Association, where we're sharing resources. So this shows the webpage here, the citiesassociation.org, that they have a calculator, they have some recommendations, they have a gallery of ADU plans coming soon, coming your way. So this whole pre-reviewed plans for code compliance is the direction that we are going towards because of this law. So could make ADUs easier. I think that was the last one. So that's my last slide. And Albert, I don't know if you're hanging on with us still, that have any comments on any of this, but or if anyone has questions from the commission.
No, I'll just add that we'll be coming to the commission soon with minor tweaks and changes to our code to implement some of these ordinances.
Okay, well, thank you for the presentation. Questions, comments? Or just...
Public comment?
Oh, thank you. Do we have any members of the public that would like to speak to this? There's no one here.
No, I have no request. Oh, yes, one hand on Zoom.
We have a hand, okay.
Yes, from Leland Weissner.
Hello, my name's Leland. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. This is my first time sort of participating as a listener, so I'm pretty impressed with the complexity that you guys are dealing with on all fronts. And just to note, my interest is I'm a broker in the Palo Alto area and own some real estate on California Avenue. So I'm getting very interested in all the different facets of discussion. And I just, very narrowly wanted to bring back the discussion on the CUP. And I know anecdotally, many of the committee members mentioned it, not having a lot of data. So I just wanted to mention that I do have what I think is a little more than anecdotal, in that when we do offer to lease to retail people who in California Avenue, because of the various constraints, the formula retail being foremost, we are leasing to smaller tenants. They're mom and pop, they're smaller, sometimes they're startups in that sense. And they most definitely are dissuaded and probably don't even go towards getting anywhere. They just walk away from our deals. They consistently see that price tag, $8,000, the uncertainty, and sometimes more, and they just walk away. In many cases, they ask us to pay, and we just can't do that, as brokers and or owners. So I just wanted to mention that in particular. And so, ironically, it is probably the formula retail parties, if it was, big box or even small box retailers that could afford it. But since they're not allowed in California Avenue, it's kind of pigeonholed many of these retailers, and the CUP sort of finishes them off, if you want. So I just wanted to make sure it's at least clear from my perspective as a landlord, as a broker, and as an active participant, especially these days on California Avenue, that the CUP really is a huge chilling effect on attracting new tenants. And I might add too, all these other discussions are wonderful to hear, because the dynamicism of what's going on is, I think, the committees and the council need to understand, as the economy's changed dramatically since COVID. I mean, we can almost talk about it as pre-COVID, post-COVID, that these rules need to adjust to fit the economy. And when the economy is booming like it has in the last 30 years or longer, it's great. You can have all kinds of rules and restrictions, but if you want to attract new people when the economy isn't doing well, you have to open up the streets like California Avenue, my opinion, needs to open, and all these other restrictions need to go away or be super streamlined and simplified. So anyways, I just wanted to say thank you for all your effort, and the complexity of it is sometimes daunting, but we could use some help in getting these restrictions removed, or at least very much relaxed.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. They actually typically, you would have had to make them when that agenda item, when we called for public speaking. But since you were our only person to speak on this item and you had something valuable for us here, we wanted to hear what you had to say anyway. But it would be better to try to do it at the right time, next time you speak with us. Thanks, but thank you very much. Okay, that's our only member of the public, so I'll bring it back to the commission. Any comments, questions for staff? Commissioner Heckman?
So thank you for the staff report. I felt that we got a little bit of an education here, but what I guess struck me a little bit is the planning staff has a lot on its plate, and it took time to put these slides together. I know staff is already looking at these laws as they move them toward whatever changes we need to see in our ordinance. And eventually we'll get a staff packet that says we need these changes in our ordinance to match up to these state laws. And so I guess what I was wondering if it was really time efficient for staff to have brought this tonight. I appreciate you did, but I would also appreciate if it was just an item in in Ms. French's report that there's a bunch of new state laws coming or that have landed. We are working on folding those into ordinances that you'll get later, and that maybe would save staff some time. So that's my comment is while I appreciate the education, I want you to be able to focus on the things that are critical. I don't think that us hearing this report tonight was critical. Maybe staff feels differently. And clearly you thought enough of it to bring it to us, but as you go forward, this was kind of unusual. I think, I've been 4 years to get this kind of report. And so it's okay with me if you don't deliver it in the future until it's packaged with the ordinance.
Okay, thank you for that. We did, the chair and vice chair did ask Ms. French if she wanted to not have it tonight, since they're really just, it's a kind of a placeholder. But I appreciate it too, but they were very anxious to bring it. So we said, okay. So I have two lights, Commissioner Chang and then Commissioner Aiken. No?
Not me.
No, okay. Commissioner Aiken?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I'm one of the bills that attracted my attention down at the Planning Commissioners Academy last month was SB 834, which prohibits the use of parking permit programs in the AB 2097 areas. And I just wondered if we had any update on current status for that.
Sorry, can you repeat the bill, SB 834?
834. I mean, it may be in a suspense file now for all I know, but.
So I can't recall if that's on, I'm starting to track the ones that are in the legislation now and in the coming through now, but not in place yet. So I don't know if what you're speaking of is a 2023.
Yeah, so it's a pending bill that our team will track as it goes through the process. It's currently still live, but we don't know sort of its chances.
Okay, thanks. That's All I really needed to know at this point.
Any other comments or questions? Not seeing any, I think we can go ahead and close this item. Thank you very much. And there's no minutes, so we're ready to adjourn the meeting after comments, questions, and et cetera.
So I think Commissioner Templeton had we talked about discussing any recess that we might take. So that's one thing we should do.
Yes, so this is a commissioner questions, comments, announcements, blah, blah. So it's your time.
Well, I hate to be between us and exiting, but I do want to just plan ahead and see if there are times that we collectively think we're not going to have a quorum and can plan on. And if that's not the case, then that's not the case. But I just wanted to discuss it. It has been quite a run here. We are not taking canceling many meetings, which I think is great. But I do think that we might also want to have some time in the summer to do the things that we need to do to stay fresh and happy with our work. So is anybody planning to take some time off in the summer? Like, I'm wondering around July or
So
August?
I already know that I will not be here on July 31st.
I don't have anything planned, but I'd certainly take advantage of it if there were an opportunity.
I'm feeling the same way. I would sure love to plan something. So, and for me, it will be the end of the summer, so late July, early August. So I don't have the firm plans, so they're not listed yet. But thank you for sharing, Vice Chair, that you have a plan for the end of July. Does anybody else already have plans that we want to share?
Commissioner Heckman does have his hand up, so maybe he does.
I don't. I know that I don't have plans that would keep me away from the mid or late July or early August meetings, but I do think we should take a break. Because even if I don't have plans, I don't mind having, 1-2 week interval where I don't have to prepare for and attend a meeting. That's a vacation. And we're volunteers, and I think we should have a vacation. And so whatever week, a majority of the commission wants to skip that meeting, I would be supportive of that in the summer.
All right, thank you. I'm going to just put my name down, and I can always take my name off if I'm not actually out of town. This is very wishful thinking for the last July meeting and the first August meeting. Thank you.
So I'll just say, if we do skip the July 31st meeting, then the gap between meetings is July 10th to August 14th. That's 4 weeks off, if that sounds good. I mean, that's just an example because we have 5 Wednesdays in July.
It's one meeting.
It's one meeting, but you get 4 weeks of.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the first week of school. I'd like to take vacation, and also that first week of school is usually very rough for people with children in school.
What's the first week of school?
The August 14th one.
Okay.
That's okay. Not everybody has kids in school, right? So, but for now, I'm going to put my name on both of those, and hopefully I will be able to make one of them.
Any other thoughts? Or I'm always indifferent to taking a vacation, but I'm happy to do so if everybody would like to. And Commissioner Heckman's hand is up again.
Once we finish talking about taking a break, I have a different item for this.
Thank you.
Is there anybody who doesn't want to take a vacation or a skip a week at the end of July?
I'm just going to chime in here. So I think we can proceed 2 ways. One is, speaking for myself, I will take my vacation when I need to. We are volunteers. And, but I think I'm indifferent as to whether we all schedule one. Obviously, if we know in advance, that's, I think, very helpful for everybody to know in advance. So that's just like I request of my colleagues that if we do know, then it's helpful because others may decide, if it becomes clear that there's no quorum, then they could plan then. But so I guess there's two paths that we can take. One is that we schedule a week, and the other is that we just all act individually. And
you have not yet been burned by this approach, but it does happen that sometimes they'll schedule your favorite project for the week you're out.
Oh, I've been burned. And then I joined in the middle of my vacation. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, is that what we want to do? I think that's the reason I'm bringing it up, is sometimes we get caught by surprise in those situations. So.
But at the same time, even if we scheduled a week, I'm not sure that my life is such that I could. So the reason why I'm hesitant to suggest that is because I, at least, am in the position where, despite the best intentions, we might pick a week and then I'm going to have to miss something else either. So it doesn't solve any problem for me. So I would love to hear, of those two options, right? Whether we kind of do it ad hoc or whether we plan one from each commissioner, what their preference is, or whether they do not have a preference.
For me, it's absurd that we don't have any scheduled time off between January and December. I think it's too much. And I know we're doing better about having a lighter load and distributing our work across the PDC meeting. So good job to you guys. But by the time August comes around, it's tough to pick up the school supplies and read the packet. There's usually a lot of stuff we're getting ready for council when they're coming back. So for me, I'd rather have a scheduled time off, and I think it's respectful of the commissioners to make sure that we have some time off.
As I said, I don't have strong feelings about this. We never used to have vacations because we only meet twice a month. It became a habit in the last few years. And I don't really care, but I do think there's value in everybody just living their lives and knowing that when you have, other things come up and you miss some meetings. I guess I have a slight preference.
Both. Yeah, for me.
I have a slight preference for what Commissioner Chang suggested, but I wouldn't want to stand in the way of anybody's vacation. So.
I don't think that you're standing in the way of anyone's vacation. I'm trying to suggest that we all take one meeting in the summer and don't meet. I think that's what I'm trying to suggest. So we had done this. So I've been on a few years now, and we had done this for many years. And the last couple of years we haven't. And I think, we understand we've been coming back from COVID. We have a lot of backlog to get through, but also it's a lot. And I think it'd be nice to be able to plan accordingly. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to say, some of the things you were implying, I'm not trying to say that we can't all take our vacations on our own time. I'm not suggesting that. I'm actually trying to collaborate and see if we can all agree on a time where we're not meeting. Thanks.
Well, then selfishly, I'm totally open to that. I just never wanted to suggest it because then I would continue to miss other meetings. But I'm happy to, I'm happy to do that. And I would suggest the 31st because I'm already not going to be here.
Right.
Any other comments?
I wanted to ask Mr. Yang if we either need to or can address this by motion. Cancel in a meeting.
We don't need.
So it.
Would it hurt to have a motion?
It probably wouldn't. I'm not sure if we could do it under this item.
Okay.
Right. If this agenda item allows that type of action.
Okay.
And my information is that it doesn't, because it's just for, announcements, really.
Okay. So.
And it's not necessary either, right? Ms. French sets the schedule.
Right.
Okay. So then if we wanted to know whether we're having a meeting on July 31st, do we just take a informal straw poll? How do we wrap this up tonight?
Yes, let's
Commissioner Reckdahl, did you want to say something?
Yeah, mean, just good best practices make sense to me to take off that first week of school. That would seem to be if we had to pick one week, that seems like a reasonable week to pick.
And that's the 31st?
No,
That's the 14th.
The following one. Is that date agreeable?
Well, not to all of us, but to me, yes, I was looking at both of those dates. Bryna already has plans on the 31st, so I would accept either of those. So.
Okay, so let's plan on one day off and have it be.
Can we just do a straw poll then, since we don't need a formal motion? So my straw poll motion is for the 31st to be our vacation meeting. And can we just go down the line and?
Yes, yes.
I'm
yes,
happy with either one, so.
Yes, okay. Yes, so we will take the 30, and I see a thumb over there in the mountains. So we'll take the 31st and as a vacation day. So none of us will be here.
Thank you for
Thank you
being
very
open to
much.
that,
And now
commissioners.
Commissioner Heckman has another item.
But,
yeah, thank you.
I wanted one comment. I mean, this
Sorry.
is something probably we should talk about, let's say in March or whatever. So if people are planning their vacations, they know ahead of time. Because now we already have vacations planned, and if they're conflicting, they're conflicting. So maybe in 9 months, let's talk.
Thank you. Commissioner Heckman.
Yeah, so when I joined the commission, we had a commissioner, Billy Riggs, who was like some kind of transportation guru. And I felt that we really had within the commission, a lot of transportation expertise, but he left toward the end of the first year. And since then, I feel like there's kind of a theme that has come up from time to time, and it came up again tonight. And that's, I'm just going to call it like a mild disappointment in our relationship with the transportation division portion of the planning department. And I'm wondering if under this concept of future meetings and agenda items, we really need a study session with Mr. Cami and other members of transportation to, either set expectations or make things work better. And I'm just wondering if that's something other commissioners think would be valuable at some future meeting when, our agenda allows.
I think that's a good suggestion, and I think it would satisfy some commissioners. So perhaps Ms. French can just keep that in mind for a night when we have a very light agenda and see if transportation is available. Does that sound like a plan?
I'm happy to reach out. Just to be clear, they used to be in the same department as
Yes.
planning, and now it's a different department, actually. So just in case the public is listening.
And I would add that some feedback I've heard from the transportation department is that they don't usually intend to come in front of us unless they have to. And I would love to, as Commissioner Heckman said, I'd love to invite them and show our interest in discussing and giving feedback and giving an opportunity for public comment to their and showcasing some of the major projects they're doing, because these are comments that generate a lot of interest and shape a lot of our planning discussion as well. It'd be nice to work a little bit more tightly with them. So I hope that however you decide to express it, it's showing our interest. Thank you.
Commissioner Chang?
I'd like to reiterate that sentiment also. I remember when I first joined the Planning and Transportation Commission, Director Cami was able to come at the beginning of all the meetings, and I understand that he might be time constrained, but at least when we had questions and for the staff report, he was able to give a larger overview. Right now, Mr. Ruiz is doing the best he can, and he does a call out to his department. But if they don't give him talking points, then he doesn't know about what's going on in areas beyond his. And then when we have questions, unfortunately, there's nobody present who knows enough about everything that the department is doing to be able to answer our questions. And so I guess I would invite like a more complete, like a more complete information exchange because we were very interested. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for that suggestion and solution. I think it's a good one. So any other comments, questions, announcements? Who's bringing dessert next meeting? No, I'm kidding. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very, very much.